Good evening. Welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo. I'm the State Section Director for MUFON LA. Tonight we have a great speaker, Dr. Stephen Bassett. In 1995, Stephen Bassett decided to bring a 15-year background in business development and a degree in physics in the field of extraterrestrial phenomenon research. He began working at the Program of Extraordinary Experience Research with the late Dr. John Mack. In 1996, Bassett established the Paradigm Research Group just outside of Washington, D.C., to provide professional support to the UFO researchers. Bassett is the only lobbyist to register on behalf of UFO research organizations. His projects have included assisting the launch of Stargate International's petition for an open congressional hearing on modern UFO evidence to try to bring Congress into the process of disclosure. In 1999, Bassett founded the Extraterrestrial Phenomenon Political Action Committee, the first PAC in history to target the politics of UFO ET phenomenon and the government embargo of facts confirming the presence of extraterrestrial life forms in our world. Early in 2001, Paradigm Research Group and the XPPAC put their support firmly behind a major new political initiative titled the Disclosure Project. Bassett was involved in the groundbreaking press conference of May 9, 2001 in Washington, D.C., where testimony of 75 government and agency employees directly relating to the UFO ET events and evidence were presented to the media. The totality of this testimony, compiled from 120 hours of interviews, essentially confirms an extraterrestrial presence and a government embargo on formal acknowledgement of this fact. Mr. Bassett has worked hard to create a broad-based coalition within the UFO ET research community that can reach out to the more than 20 million citizens concerned with the politics of disclosure. He seeks to establish a significant political structure to meaningfully influence government politics and actions regarding the extraterrestrial presence. Mr. Bassett is a lobbyist, an activist, a commentator, and a columnist, and his work has been released in, among other things, the Washington Post, the Washington Times, New York Times, the Legal Times, and the Christian Science Monitor. Everybody please give a warm welcome to Dr. Stephen Bassett.
It's appropriate that we're meeting tonight in a church. I believe it is St. Innocent. St. Innocent, isn't it? Okay. And I think we are all innocent, I am sure. I certainly feel innocent tonight. But it's appropriate because I am basically here to preach hell and damnation, which is probably not your normal fare. Though I know when Stanton Friedman gets rolling, he gets close. Little hell and damnation. Now, I'm not picking on you, believe me. I'm not here to pick on LA MUFON. But I do want to get your feedback, and we're going to try very hard to shut me up in time so we can have some of that, and some response and what have you. Even from this side where I can't see anybody, right? Though it looks like a scene from Communion, you know, with the lights in the background and the people coming out. I know what's going on there. Over here, very clear. I like that. But you're a good audience to talk about this, and these issues I will be talking about hopefully in the future to larger and larger audiences. But they are not the standard things that you're used to hearing. But before we do the hell and damnation thing, I want to do a little tidying up and some issues here real quickly. First of all, in the back there, right where the check-in desk is, you see a couple flyers. This flyer is for the X conference, which is my conference that we held April 22-24 in Gaithersburg, just outside of Washington, D.C., where it was held last year. And there's a website, but these are flyers for those that don't have a website or somebody to pass out to something else. Feel free to pick those up. Let me mention that I won't go into the details to say last year's conference was extremely good. And many of the people that you have heard here were presented at that conference. But I want to make particular note for this audience that at this year's conference, there will be 5 awards given, as was the case last year. These PRG awards are to try to start recognizing the people that have done extraordinary work over the years. There are 5. There is the PRG Award for Courage in Politics, Courage in Journalism, the Disclosure Award, the Hall of Fame Award posthumously given, and the Hall of Fame Award for a living individual, which is essentially a Lifetime Achievement Award. Last year, the Courage in Journalism Award went to Sarah McClendon. The Political Courage Award went to Stephen Schiff. I think you know these people. The Disclosure Award went posthumously to Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso. The Hall of Fame Award for deceased individual went to J. Allen Hynek, and the Living Hall of Fame Award went to Stanton Friedman. Of the 5 awards, 4 of them will not be announced until that night. They will be kept secret right up until the banquet on Saturday night, the 23rd. However, the Hall of Fame Award for a living individual is being announced, has already been announced. Some of you know this, but I'll tell you. That is going to go to Walter Andrus for his 30 years, well, really 40 years, because he's continued to dabble, of work in directing MUFON. A lifetime, virtually, of contribution. And so we're announcing that earlier so that people in MUFON, and feel free to spread the word, who might like to come and share that moment with Walter, could join us. And we hope that many of you choose to do that. Also, there's another little brochure back there. It's not too many left, but this is the National UFO Conference, the 43rd, will be held again at the Renaissance Hotel, where it was held last year. This is the 4-star Renaissance Hotel, downtown Hollywood, next to the Kodak Theater, or near the Kodak Theater, Grumman Theater. It has great potential. It is being directed by Lisa Davis out of San Diego. And it is not only an extraordinary venue, it is, I think, a toehold for this issue in the heart of Hollywood, which is the center, a power center, for a lot of very powerful and wealthy people who, when they choose to do so, are going to support this work, because we know that privately many of them believe in this issue, understand its value and importance, and when they elect to do so, will have the ability to change history. And so having a conference right there is a good thing. It needs your support. Last year was held on Halloween, which is not a good idea. This year it's going to be held on the Labor Day weekend. It is a nicely placed, well between other conferences, 3-day weekend, so it'll be a 2-day conference, so people have a 3rd day to go around Hollywood and see what's happening. And then the last thing I want to mention is that there's a little questionnaire that has been handed out. Now, if you haven't gotten this questionnaire, 3 questions, they have more over the desk. Raise your hand and someone there will pass this out to you. Kind of fish around for a pen. I'm hoping I'll get an answer from everybody. So, I forget the names of the gentlemen there, but Bruce, I think, and Eric, see if you can get out to these people here, get this questionnaire. Just answer it and privately fold it up and give it back. Don't let anybody see your answer. This is an anonymous poll. But the questions that are being asked here are questions I have asked to a number of audiences that I've talked to. And they are very simple questions which you interpret. I'm not going to interpret them for you. You decide how you want to parse it out. But the first question is, I am convinced that intelligent extraterrestrial beings are visiting our planet now. I am convinced. 2, I am convinced the U.S. government has told me the truth, not has told the truth regarding UFOs and ETs. And the third question is, I believe I have had direct contact with extraterrestrial beings, either negative or positive in nature. Yes or no. 3 yes or no questions. When you get these done, let them know you're finished, and they'll filter up, and they are tallying this up, and they're going to give me your response, and we're going to talk about that at some point down the line. And it's very interesting, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. So I think with that, I'm going to essentially begin. How can I put this? 9 years ago, I entered this field, not really knowing that much. Oh, I thought I knew a lot, but you know how it is. The older you get, you realize how much you don't know. In fact, you start to realize that you don't even know what you don't know. But I got into this field, and I started pursuing it. And I had the good fortune of beginning at Cambridge, working with Karen Wesolowski as a development person, as a volunteer. And I had traveled across the country to do that. And I got to meet John Mack and hang out there for about 4 months. And got to know him a little. Certainly got to see what they were doing. And it was exciting. It was a wonderful door to walk through. Because John Mack was a great man. And it's very painful to me that he's not here, because it is inconceivable that he would not be here. His greatness and the importance of his contribution was something that a man of his vitality should have lived to see and experience. But through bad luck, that did not happen. And after a few months, I realized that my place was not in Cambridge in that academic setting, but rather my place was elsewhere. And in a fairly short amount of time, I knew what I had to do. It was one of those few moments in my life when I knew what I had to do, trust me. I was one of those guys that when I was in school, I took every single test you could take to find out what you wanted to do in life. And the answers were always, you have no idea, you know. And it always pained the counselors to tell me that, because their job is to counsel you, to give you advice, to help you get forward. So when a guy would sit there and he'd read the thing, he says, Mr. Bassett, you have no idea what the hell to do with yourself, and you're not making any progress according to this test. I felt bad for him. I didn't know then, but I know now that it would be about another 30 years, and at the age of 49, I would find my calling. And my calling was to engage what I called then the politics of UFOs. I don't like the phrase, term UFO. I don't like it at all, and I want to see it gone. However, that doesn't mean MUFON is bad, because you see, MUFON, the UFO, is sheltered on one side by an M and on the other side by an N, and it is never pronounced MUFON, it's pronounced MUFON, and so the UFO quality is diminished. Okay, it's a single word, single idea. No problem with that, it's cool. But UFO naked and all by itself, I'm not particularly fond of that, is an acronym, right? I used to drive my bicycle down to the Reagan National Airport, right? You can still do it, by the way, which really bothers me a little bit. And you simply park it right there, and the planes come in. I had one of those moments of clarity, and at the age of 49, I went out there, and I knew what I had to do, and it came to me one day while I was sitting in Cambridge, is I had to engage the politics of UFOs, and that eventually came to be called the politics of disclosure, all right, which is a more appropriate term. And now it's called exopolitics, thanks to the work of Alfred Weber and Michael Salla, and I think to some degree myself. This is the term that's going to be in the dictionary eventually. It's not there now. Exobiology is, but not exopolitics. But it will be there. If you go to the X Conference website, x-conference.com, and you get into eventually get through the graphics and get to the top page, you'll actually see a definition of exopolitics. I'm proposing to the British Encyclopedia and all those other ones, Webster's. And it's essentially the totality of the interaction, social and political action between human beings and extraterrestrial-related phenomena and extraterrestrial beings, whatever that is. And all those things attended to that, both pre-disclosure, post-disclosure, pre-contact and post-contact, and by contact, of course, I mean formal contact, where gifts are being exchanged and there's like a cocktail party and everything, and they're all talking. Because obviously there's plenty of contact going on, because I've talked to a lot of people that are having it. So we finally settled on exopolitics. But I'll sometimes say the politics of disclosure, because the politics of disclosure is really the subset of exopolitics dealing in the pre-disclosure period. Right? And that's what I did. And it turned out that it was one of those deals where you walked into the room and there was just nobody there. And you're thinking, well, I'm just going to hang out here for a while, and some other people will arrive, and we'll chat, and what have you. So I registered as a lobbyist, and I started a PAC, and I ran for Congress and all that stuff, and pretty much the room was empty. Only recently did it start to get a few extra people. There is still no other lobbyist registered on this subject. There is still no other PAC registered on this subject. I was the first person to ever be on a congressional ballot, and in a November ballot, not a primary. Cats, dogs run in primaries, literally. There's always a few that some colleges run in some Democratic Republican primary. All you have to do is put a paw print down on a piece of paper. But to get on a ballot in November, you have to go through some serious hoops. And we did that, and we got on the ballot, and we had 4 or 5 debates. I was shut out of 16, and made as much of that as I could. But we had 4 debates, and so I'm on the stage with Connie Morella and Chris Van Hollen, who won, and we're talking about extraterrestrials. This was the first. In the last election, 2 years later, 6 candidates who made it to November talked about extraterrestrials and went on radio and did that. They were all in lopsided
districts where they couldn't win, but they were still on the ballot. So that's a 6-to-1 increase. I guess we're looking for 36 next time. This is all breaking ground. This is all setting, example. It's called normalization. It's called doing things appropriately to the issue. And it's about the disclosure process. And that has been my calling for 9 years. And it's been interesting, and it's been frustrating, but I wouldn't change. I wouldn't go back and do it anyway really differently, other than get that PhD and the 20 million that I needed before I started this. But in any event, we're moving towards some sort of, how would you say, culmination of that process. And I'm here to talk about that today, but actually some larger issues. And I'm going to start the larger issues this way. As I told you, I started out not knowing what I didn't even know. And in 9 years, I've learned some things. And eventually, it became necessary to really start talking about them in a more expansive way. The first thing there are a couple things you need to know before I get into these areas. And that is that I have very steadfastly tried to keep this work nonpartisan. Now, don't get me wrong. I got some real partisan, opinions up here, right? Sometimes they just scream to get out, and I have plenty of opinions on just about everything. But so what? This issue is not a partisan issue. It is not a Democratic-Republican issue or a Green Party issue or anything else. This issue is a transcendent one, engaging the planet and all the people on it. It's certainly not even an American issue. We only make up 5% of the population. It means we're outnumbered 20-to-1. There's another 5,700,000,000 people out there who ain't us. And so the idea that the extraterrestrials turned up because of some development in the Republican National Committee or the fact that the Democratic Party moved to the left or whatever is absurd. The fact that they're here because, I don't know, some American thing happening, also a little absurd, though it's notable that the United States did lead in the development of the atomic bomb and in the development of those weapons, though quickly followed by the Soviets. And that may give a kind of an American touch to this, but overall, they're engaging the planet. So I am nonpartisan. I may say something that'll tweak you, and you go, I think he's dissing my guy. He's dissing my guy. I'm really not, all right? This is a nonpartisan issue. The second thing you need to know is that I'm basically a secular person. I'm not religious. I never have been. Though, over the last 9 years, after all I've seen and heard, I have developed a far more generous appreciation of just how complex the universe may be, and I'm much more open than I used to be, to some of the more advanced spiritual things that some people take for common. Take as a common matter to them, and I'm fascinated by that. And I'm becoming a big fan of reincarnation. Reincarnation is good stuff. It's better than Unitarianism, I'm telling you. Okay? Because as you know by now, right, life is very difficult, and you screw up constantly, and there's 80 million possibilities, right, just in where you get born and who you get born to. And then once you get born into this world, every couple of minutes you got to make a decision, and most of them are wrong. By the time you're 50, you're going, man, I did this all wrong. I need another shot at it. Fact is, you need thousands of shots at it. And so the idea of reincarnation makes complete sense. So I'm prepared to buy into that puppy. Big time. I'm ready. I'm ripe. I'm ripe to be recruited to the Church of Reincarnationism. It is notable that in the abduction research, the concept of reincarnation comes up, and I find that to be, how would you say, an independent source of evidence on this, to go along with other evidence which is turned up and written about by interesting people like, I think Michael Weiss is one of the leaders there. So I'm much more open, and I suspect that the universe, even in its pure physicality, will prove to be every bit as profound as some of the religions of the world has painted it to be, and that's fine with me. And the third thing you need to know as we get into this is that not only am I not a catastrophist, I have grave and deep misgivings about catastrophism. Now, some of you are saying, catastrophism, what is he talking about? Actually, it's simple. It is something that has been with us since time began. And that is for very reasonably easy to understand basis and logic, human beings are very inclined to feel that the world is about to end. There's a certain satisfaction that comes from it, and it has always been around, and it's still around and going strong. The world's going to end. In some cases, they'll predict it in a month, a week, 6 years, 10 years, 1,000 years, but it's definitely going to end. This is catastrophism of one form or another. There are also religious versions of it that are subtle and less subtle. Armageddon, the rapture, one of the most rapidly growing concepts in America today is the rapture within the evangelical church, and of course the best-selling series of books in the last 50 years, maybe in all time, is of course Lay and his partner's book, the Left Behind series. So something going on there. Okay. The point is that regardless of what may happen tomorrow, all previous predictions of the world ending have been wrong. And it's pretty fair to guess that almost all the predictions currently out there, hanging out there, are going to be wrong. And I'm willing to bet that at the end of 2012, the state of the world is going to be pretty much the same as it was in January the 1st, 2012. That doesn't mean some interesting things aren't going to happen, right? In fact, the world may change radically, but end it is not going to, all right? And this is irritating to me for a very simple reason. And I happen to think that this has been going on a very long time. And the reason is this, that if you are in authority, if you are a group of people in power, whether you be a small or large group, controlling large numbers of people, and certainly the world has no lack of large numbers of people, and you want to keep them out of your hair, you want to keep them politically dormant, if you want to keep them passive or languid, if you just want to generally not have to deal with them, one very excellent way is to put out there the idea that the world is going to end. It's not hard to figure this out, all right? Because if you've got to face the prospect, say, of dramatically changing the foreign policy of your nation, or overcoming racism, or just making a really, delicious lunch for all 6 of your kids, and you think the world's going to end next Thursday, why don't you just stay in bed? Why bother? What is the point? What is the point of any kind of intellectual or political engagement of reality if the world's about to end? This is not difficult. And that's a problem, you see. Because once you disengage, the people in power essentially have free run, don't they? They know the world's not going to end, but they're more than happy for you to think it's going to end. Now, a meteor, of course, will probably land in the Pacific Ocean tomorrow and take out virtually everything in the Pacific Rim. And I'll feel embarrassed about that, and I will be wrong. But there's nobody in this room that's going to bet everything in their bank account that it'll happen. The world is not going to end. Most certainly it will end in about 4 to 7 billion years when the sun expands to a brown dwarf. Hopefully we will have found other lodging by then. It's possible that Ed Dames will be reincarnated and he will go on radio and say, "I told you so." Whatever. The point is the world is not going to end. The problem is, and unless something happens pretty soon, before this century is much further along, you're going to wish that it had. Because what I've learned in 9 years, which I try to bring to you in a nonpartisan way, from a non-religious but secular point of view, and from the point of view of someone who has no thought that all of this is going to be blasted out of existence, is extremely upsetting to me. But it is, to me, the cold, logical conclusion from simply paying attention to the facts. And it was a collateral effect of getting into this issue, this field. And so one could say, well, it was unnecessary. I mean, why, just focus on the ET thing. Well, it's interesting about that. And I think all of you, most of you have experienced this, that when you focus on the ET thing, almost invariably and very quickly, you have to start trying to put yourself in their place. You try to put yourself up there in one of those ships, which can hover above the Earth in stationary orbit or do anything else it wants, and watch the Earth just rotate around underneath you. And view it as an extraterrestrial, all right? Not as a card-carrying member of a particular party, citizen of Georgia, citizen of the United States, North America, but rather just someone completely outside looking down and assessing the situation objectively. You try to do that. I mean, you have to do it because you're trying to understand. You're doing what is appropriate. You're trying to get a perspective from that side to help explain the evidence you're seeing here, to put it all together, given the limitations that you're under, and they're significant. In other words, you start to look at the globe as a whole. And so, not surprisingly, when you start looking at the globe as a whole, you start to come to conclusions about that. Because obviously everything else is going on around you. This is not happening in a vacuum. Just because you see a saucer tomorrow, it may be a perfect daylight disk, doesn't mean that something else isn't happening in Africa or China, and you're not going to watch that on the news. It's all there together. That was the point from the beginning. This issue is simply part of the world. It is not the summum bonum of all interesting stuff. It isn't the most important thing, really, in a sense, though it's the most important inappropriately and underdeveloped and underinvestigated and reported issue in the world. But it's part of the whole process. So, you start to think globally. A lot of people started to try to do this, particularly got going after World War II. You had Barbara Ward, who was famous for writing a book called Spaceship Earth, and others. Rachel Carson was a globalist in a lot of ways, and others slowly emerged, but nobody was really taking it seriously. They weren't buying it, right? Because one, there was no satellites up there. They had no pictures of the Earth. But before long, they had those, and they had people walking on the moon and everything else, and then they had big TVs bringing everything in, and this globe just came crashing into our lives. The whole thing, the whole package, all right? And we began to change. We started to think that way. And we started to look at the situation. And when you look at the situation, it is not good at all. Now, I'm not talking about the fact that, there's a lot of traffic in LA and it can be bad at times, or that the air quality is a little down in some places, or, the city council is corrupt. I'm not talking about those kinds of problems. I'm talking about the big stuff. Now, I know you're thinking, yeah, there's big stuff out there, but I'm little stuff. That's big stuff, I'm little stuff. It's not going to bother me, it's not going to affect me. I'm not taking it on, I'm not going to deal with it, I'm just going to enjoy my life, and that stuff is not an issue. Well, sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's not. And in order to demonstrate that as best I can, I'm going to use an analogy from the very recent past. There's a reason this speech is called the reality tsunami. Which, by the way, to your good fortune, is my third presentation of this since I came to California. I did it in San Diego, and then I did it again in Orange County last night. Wonderful groups, great people. And so now you're getting the third one, and I think I'm going to get it right tonight, because I really didn't get it right the other two. So this is good. Third time's a charm. It's called the reality tsunami, and it goes like this, all right? The world and the physical powers embedded in it are extremely powerful, and you ignore them at your peril. Whether you or your nation or your species, you ignore them at your peril. I don't care how much reality TV you watch, I don't care how much LSD you take, the real world is always there, and it will confront you, right? You can walk out of here tonight, and you can go stand in front of the first bus that comes along, and you can theoretically conclude that that bus is going to pass through you. Or you can be a live-in-the-now person who says, in the now, I am standing here perfectly fine. The future doesn't matter. And so that bus is coming at me, but that's in the future, and that is not relevant to me. And you know exactly what's going to happen. And so a couple of months ago, you had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people on the shores of the Indian Ocean. And they were just like you and I. And you could kind of divide them up 4 ways. And I do that in this fashion. One group was lying on the beach with a book or taking a nap with headphones on, listening to some fine music. They were sunning, they were extremely comfortable, they were relaxed, they were happy. They might even have a nice umbrella over them. And they were having a good time. And the water started to move away from the shore. It started going out 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet. They didn't even know it. There was no reason for them to know it. Everything was fine. Nothing bad could happen. And then the water came back, and they were gone. They did nothing wrong. They were enjoying themselves. They were living their life. They just weren't paying attention at that particular moment. They were gone. And there's a second group, right? Different, totally different. These people were kind of standing up, looking around, seeing what's going on. They were kind of paying attention, and the water started going out. Went out 500, 600, 800 feet, and there were all these flopping fish. Big, solid, nice flopping fish. And their reaction was, free fish. And so they ran out there and they started collecting the free fish. Not an unreasonable thing to do, particularly if you're poor, right? Some of the people that were on those shores were poor, very poor. So they went out and picked up the fish. Unfortunately for them, their government either didn't have the money or just didn't bother to invest the money to educate the population of that country, of these countries which have tens and tens of thousands of miles of shoreline, exactly how tidal waves work, how tsunamis function, what they look like, and what to do if one comes along. They just didn't tell them. And they didn't educate themselves. They missed that documentary on the History Channel. They didn't read that book. And so when the water went away, they just didn't know better. So they went out to get the fish. And they're gone. And there's a third group. We call them the lucky. Right? It's a great song, the rose. I love that rose. You think the love is just for the lucky and the strong. Right? These are the lucky. They were in the 4th floor of the condo. They were 2,000 feet up, higher up in the tree line. They just happened to not be there that day. They took a drive into the city. They just weren't there, or they were high enough up. And when it came in, they watched it, they filmed it, and they were okay. They were lucky. We're all lucky, right? Every time you take a ride on that freeway, if you get where you're going, you're lucky. Because I can assure you on any given day, you don't make it. So there's a lot of that. And then there's the 4th group. These, are you okay in the sound? Yeah. Okay. The 4th group are those who are standing, watching, paying attention, aware, relaxed, and they saw the water going away. And they had knowledge, they had understanding, they knew what it meant. They knew that reality was heading their way, that something profound was going on, and that there was danger. And so they moved to higher ground, quickly. And they were safe. 4 groups. It is my belief, and a growing number of other people's belief, that the 21st century, which has gotten off to a bad start, in case you hadn't noticed, is on its way to becoming a calamity, a disaster, a human nightmare, which will make the 20th century look like a real party. And you say, well, wait a minute, you can't top the 20th century. Okay, that was first-rate stuff, all right? We're talking massive genocide, nuclear bombs falling. We're talking plagues, earthquakes, and so forth. Wars, dozens, hundreds of wars. We're talking about trillions of dollars wasted on weapons, and on and on and on and on. And we're talking about a population growth from 1.5 billion to 6 billion, quadruple by the end of the century, right? We're talking about between 25 and 30,000 children a day dying because they don't have enough food or they don't have enough nutriments to deal with disease. That's 25,000 to 30,000 a day, folks. All right? That's common. Everybody knows that statistics. WHO statistics. Been around for a long time. In a good year, 22, 23. Bad year, 30, 31. 7 trade centers a day full of children, 3,000 each, dropping down every day, another day. Of course, no buildings. Trade center with huge buildings, very expensive, very costly. With the kids, no buildings, so it's less expensive. Every day. That's at the end of the 20th century. We're going to top that You betcha, right? There are 4 tracks, 4 fundamental macroscopic tracks, and we're going to focus tonight on the 4th one, all right? But very quickly, I'm going to mention the other 3. And when I mention these tracks, the thing you have to understand, that for a whole lot of reasons, we're not going to go in tonight, that's another 6-hour lecture, the political structures, the political class, the nation states, and the non-governmental agencies, for whatever, have made the decision that they are basically not going to deal with it. Right? 3 major tracks. In other words, on these 3 things, these 3 tidal waves, which are out there at the ocean, out there at the edge rather of the ocean, somewhere in the 21st century, heading your way, ain't going to do anything about it. Not going to tell you about it. Not going to build a boat. Not going to pass any leaflets. Not going to do diddly squat. The first track is population growth. Population growth is a disaster, and they're not dealing with it, period. Projection is 9 billion by 2050, down from 12 billion. It's beyond comprehension. What's this? Excellent. That 9 billion is net of all of the unnecessary deaths that occur between now and then, from plague, emerging diseases, war, genocide, calamities of whatever sort. So it's a net figure, net of massive suffering. Based on reasonable projections, by the year 2012, 2015, the number of children dying a day on the planet Earth could be 100,000 a day. And every one of them leaves a family behind that's really irritated. In fact, every single person on the planet that dies unnecessarily and unfairly leaves relatives behind that are really irritated. And at the rate we're going, there's going to be 1 billion or 2 billion really irritated people. Right? Now that's a lot of terrorists, a lot of terrorist groups. And at the rate that we're spending to eliminate the terrorists, it's going to take $100 quadrillion. So we got a mathematical problem there. This is not a luxury the human race can afford. Is that kind of death rate by first and second world countries? But that's exactly where we're headed for, based on the most recent but favorably received population projections. The human race will either collectively come together as planetary citizens and deal in a fair and just manner with this issue by equitably and non-coercively using powerful incentives, reduce the population from 9 to 8 to 7 to 6 to 5 billion, and if it doesn't do it, then somebody else is going to do it for you as they see fit. That's all I'm going to say on that subject. The second track that's going on, right, it's coming our way, is the rise of security states in the first world, and in particularly in the United States. The emergence of the security state in America is one of the most extraordinary and interesting phenomena in all of history. And I got to know it because it is directly connected to the 4th issue I was talking about, which is the ET issue. But be that as it may, what I call the secret empire, that I've been talking about for a long time, is simply described as the intelligence wing of the military industrial complex. It includes all the intelligence agencies in the government, of which there are about 14, 15. It includes all of the classified documents, all of the classified people with security clearances, all of the underground and undeclared facilities, all of the money spent above and below the budget line on these issues, right? All of the covert programs, all of the deep covert programs, all of the unacknowledged super deep covert programs, right? All of that, which now is funded at the rate of somewhere between 60 and 100 billion a year, depending upon, who you talk to, all right? The secret empire is bigger than the Roman Empire. And it has elements within other governments in the first world, generally tied back to the United States through the NATO treaty and other treaties. And they've built the most sophisticated technologies humans have ever seen. And the side point to be made about this is a somewhat awkward issue for me, which I've written and talked about. The secret empire primarily was built to service the Cold War. We now know that it was also built to service the extraterrestrial presence dilemma, right? And that was kept secret. So it's sort of like, they built something, but they only gave you half the reason. But the first half was adequate, and American people accepted it completely. Gave them a license to do whatever they needed to do. Build all the underground bases you want, spy as much as you want, emulate the Soviets as much as you want, turn over governments, assassinate, win this war. Because we have nuclear weapons pointed at us that, if they are in fact ever launched, will destroy the entire country as well as most of the world. That's a pretty good license, and they exercised that license, right? And they won. The Cold War lasted from 47 basically to 91. It lasted 44 years, a good run, not the 100 Years' War, right? Europe was famous for always having a 100 Years' War. They were hoping to beat that record, but they never got around to it. Peace caught up with them. But we had 44 years. The Soviet Union, the United States spent approximately between 13 and 20 trillion dollars just on the war, which is a good chunk of change. It was over. And when it was over, the Soviet Union dismantled into separate republics, probably the greatest dismantlement in the history of civilization. I don't think any empire has ever dismantled quite this way. Modified its behavior substantially, reduced certain weapons. The KGB was disbanded and reconstituted. Things got a little wild and crazy, and now things are moving in the other direction with our good friend, Mr. Putin. But overall, there was a dramatic change in the Soviet Union. The other most closed state in the world, the most secret society in the world, at least in the Western world, was East Germany, and that virtually came completely apart. The secret records, the Stasis documents, all that stuff, were literally dumped in the street in filing cabinets and grabbed by people, and then went and sold them on eBay. In the United States, nada, nothing, zero. No pullback, no reduction of the security structures, no reduction of the intelligence complex, no reduction in virtually anything. And 13 years later, there are still 20,000 nuclear warheads available and requiring dismantlement that have not been dealt with yet after 14 years. I never understood it. There was a massive peace dividend predicted. It didn't happen. I never understood it. And since the end of that war, we've had more war, an additional war. A little more, the wars are changing in their structure and design, which means that we still have enemies, fine. But the enemies are not the Soviet Union, but the secret empire grows ever larger. And more troubling still is the fact that it is so vast, and I use this analogy in Orange County, I'll use it again. It's like the 20-foot hockey player. A guy comes in, he says, I want to be goalie, and he's 20 feet high. And you say, oh boy, get in here, all right? That 20-foot guy, put him on the goal. And so he gets over in front of the goal, and he stands there, right, like this. Unfortunately, the goal is right between his legs, right? He's so big, and he shoot right between his legs, and he score all night. He's too big. Can't be a goalie. Secret empire is so large, so vast. It has so many people to classify, so many documents to keep track of. I think it costs, $10 to just declassify a single document. It's got the complexes and the facilities and the protocols, and it's just huge, and it takes a lot of effort to keep track of all that stuff. So consequently, and there are those who disagree with this, I acknowledge that, but for the sake of my discussion, bear with me. Consequently, in spite of all of that money being spent, about 13, 14 disaffected members of some Arab groups cruise into the country, grab a couple of airplanes, take out a good part of New York, virtually wipe out the air industry, and blow up the Pentagon. And they missed it, right? And they've made other mistakes like that. When the Soviet Union collapsed, one of the first things the CIA said was, wow, didn't see that coming. And people are going, how come? Well, we just missed it. And every time the secret empire makes a mistake, the response is always the same. It's got to get bigger. We need more secrecy, we need more power, we need more money, and we will not make that mistake again. And they make another mistake and it gets bigger. So this is kind of a self-fulfilling thing. It's a self-generating thing with no end. Bottomless. No bottom either, underground, up ground. How many people here know what echelon means? How many people here know what echelon? I got a couple, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Decent number. Can't see here. It's all dark there. I think we're talking about 50%. Let me tell you, you go up to the local mall, just go on down there and just go up to just regular old people and ask them, do you know what the echelon system is? You get 1 out of 100, you're lucky. That's amazing. That's amazing. The secret empire put a deep space satellite system up, built by TRW, that was able to monitor all of the communications on the planet. Virtually. All the air communications and a good deal of the ground communications, which invariably go through air at some point. And you say, well, you know, fine, so they can monitor 500 billion conversations. What does that mean? Well, thanks to Cray computers and other supercomputers, by simply putting in a few keywords, they can Google you up in about 5 seconds. All right? So if they Google up Mrs. Jones, pot pie, recipe, right, Saturday night bingo, they got her talking to her neighbor about what to bring to bingo on Saturday night. And that's the system that you keep hearing about when they talk about picking up the chatter in Afghanistan or Pakistan. And they're not supposed to use it in the United States, but then nobody believes that. In fact, there's a whole big story there. We don't want to go there. But 1 out of 100 Americans, if that, even know exists. Right? That isn't speculation. That's reality up there. That's a real surveillance systems that a surveillance system which George Orwell, in his wildest dreams, could not even conceive. It's taut stuff. And yet, ultimately, it'll be small potatoes. If you haven't seen Enemy of the State, go see it, and go see it again. Echelon is all over that movie, but they never mentioned the name. Probably couldn't get permission. Right? The secret empire is growing. It has no oversight. In fact, you only have 2 oversight bodies between you and that empire. That's it. You say, it's the president? No, not the president. Pentagon? No, not the Pentagon. Who oversees this vast empire on your behalf? 2 groups. The Select Intelligence Committee of the House and the Select Intelligence Committee of the Senate. Each made up of a modest number, I think maybe the Senate 7, 8, in the House maybe 12, 13 members, whose job is to keep track of this empire that I just talked to you about. Do they go and walk through it? No. Do they really know the totality of it? No. Do they understand its budget? No. Are they told the truth about it? No. In fact, do they really have any ability to affect it? Virtually not. Every once in a while, they'll kind of cause a little bit of a ruckus, but it's almost inconsequential. All right? It's made up of just regular human beings, and this is a kind of a desirable committee to get on, and so they'll try to get on it whether they know anything or not. One of its most famous members was Gary Condon, who had the great misfortune of having an affair with someone who happened to get murdered. He did not murder this woman, but he had affairs at a little love nest apartment that he had. And there were other things that went on there, and it's pretty standard fare in Washington. We don't need to go there, but the point is, it's the kind of thing you can get blackmailed 18 ways to Sunday on, and he was a member of the Select Intelligence Committee of the House. The secret empire is incredibly important to the future of this country, and you have absolutely no influence on it, and the people who are supposed to influence have virtually no power. It is a charade. That is another one of the tsunamis that is heading this way.
What about the new intelligence arm of the Pentagon?
Of course. They're not just rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. They're building new decks. They're building new hulls, new smokestacks. Lord knows, it's going to get bigger and broader and wider. Trust me, it always does. And where is it going? You just don't know, do you? But I know that every one of you is a little queasy about it. And you're thinking, well, you know, there's nothing much I can do. And I'm not here to pick on you folks, because in a way there really isn't much you can do. Right? You just sort of, hey, I'm just going to hang in there, and one day I'm going to have to face up to it. You know, one way or the other. Now, there is another track out there, and it is the one that we're really interested in. And it is the most promising one, but yet one still of a serious concern. And that is, of course, the matter of extraterrestrials. Right? Here's the deal in shorthand. I can't say it any simpler than this. You find people and your predecessors and their predecessors going all the way back, 1940s, late 1940s, early 1950s, and NICAP, and a number of other groups. Your numbers thousands, 10,000, 15, 20, 30,000 people, I think, have been actively involved in kind of an investigatory way in some way or another, going all the way back to 1947. It's a good chunk of people. You saw something happening, you said it needs to be looked at. Government said, no, it doesn't. Well, maybe it does, but we're not really going to. And then they said, nah, there's nothing there, whatever. They just fed you a bunch of baloney and you didn't buy it. And you said, well, okay, if you won't look at it, we'll look at it. And so you went out and checked things out, and they wouldn't. And it's real simple. So they didn't do the science, you did the science. And you worked for a very long time, and you succeeded. You did. I mean, absolutely, without question. The investigators working for NICAP and MUFON and CUFON and CUFOR and CUFOS and all of the groups did their job. They, with obviously some mistakes from time to time, and some gaps here and there, and a little bit of rust around the edges. I mean, clearly you weren't overfunded, if you know what I mean. You proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, that there's an extraterrestrial presence. Now, some of you may not yet be able to go that far. That's okay. But I can assure you millions have. All right? Let's take a look. I do this in front of just about every group that I talk to. I ask these 3 questions. And I don't know if we got every. I think we're missing some people. Some people didn't answer. We got 27 here. I think we got about 50 people in the room. We got 27. It's representative. Same deal. To the question, are you convinced that extraterrestrials are engaging the planet Earth? All yeses, no nos, 100%. Do you believe the U.S. government is telling the truth about this? Everyone but one said yes. I mean, no. Everyone but one said no. One person said yes. And, this is the one I always love, are you having contact with extraterrestrial beings, positive or negative? The answer, 14 out of 27. Over 50% of you. Now, believe me, I happen to know that, and the reason I do this is if I had asked for a raising of hands, a lot of people would not have raised their hands and responded to these questions. Because even now, even in MUFON, even in 2005, there are many of you that just don't feel that your view on this needs to be publicly displayed, which is an interesting thing and worth discussion. That's fine. So it's an anonymous answer. And you know what the polls are showing at the general public level, CNN, Time, Reuters, all that stuff. Generally, they're running now around 50%. ETs are behind UFOs. About 80%, the government's lying. All right? And recently, they added a new question, really within the last 3 years. I forget, it was Time, CNN, the same, high-end polling operation. They added the abduction question. They said, do you believe that abductions are the result of alien activity? 20%? Yes. 20%? Yes. American public. They haven't asked the question yet, though, and I'm waiting for this one. I'm waiting for Time or Reuters or CNN to go out and do a big one. They need to do some good numbers on this because they don't want to have. They want to be very persuasive in their results. And they need to ask anonymously maybe 100,000 Americans. They need to ask them, have you had contact with extraterrestrial beings? And then we're going to get that number. And I think that number is going to astound. All right? It's going to absolutely astound. I will tell you a quick story. I was invited by 2 students of Wesleyan University to come up to that school in Connecticut and talk to some students up there. And it wasn't a group, wasn't a club or anything, just some students that would come if they wanted to. They had flyers put up. These same 2 students, by the way, started a 4-credit course on extraterrestrial phenomena. Because that school is a very advanced kind of school, a lot of flexibility. And they started and created a curricula and they taught it. And they had to turn away tons of students because they didn't have enough room for all those that wanted to take the course. These kids were really ahead of their time. And both of them came down and worked on my campaign in 2002. Derek Garcia was one of them, and his good friend Peter Morgenstern was the other. And they brought me up there, and there was 40 students in that room, and I gave them the same exact question, same exact one. All right, I'm never going to change it. And of the 40 students, 37 said that they're convinced that extraterrestrials are engaging the planet. Every one of them said the government is lying, and there were 8 students that said that they'd had contact with extraterrestrial beings. Now, these students, this is Wesleyan University, folks. You wish you had their SAT scores, all right? These are smart kids. And then, 2 weeks later, I had a presentation to give in Gaithersburg, actually deeper Gaithersburg, out by Frederick. This is kind of a rural area of Montgomery County. And there's a nice group there called First Fridays, and they meet every first Friday. Not about this subject per se, about anything, right? These are people that haven't sold their soul yet to cable television. They go out, they listen to people and do nice things. And they tend to be older, 50s, 60s, a lot of couples, almost no young people at all. And I went there, and it was a Unitarian church. And there was virtually about 40. I remember it vividly. There was 40 people there. Or at least 40 responded to this. And so I gave them those questions, and they came back. This was just 2 weeks later. So I'm looking at this question, right? And we got these somewhat retired, possibly, or some rural people, some religious people sitting out there. And I read it out. And of those 40 people in upper Montgomery County, I think 36 said extraterrestrials are behind the UFO phenomena. I think one said the government was telling the truth. All the rest said that the government was lying. And there were 8 people in that audience that said they'd had contact with extraterrestrial beings. This is unbelievable. Right? What is the number? What is the percentage? Right? Because let me be really clear. Exopolitics is headed your way like a tsunami. And the most explosive component of exopolitics is the interaction of human beings with extraterrestrials. Period. That's the big one. It's massive. It's one of the principal barriers to the cover-up on a number of levels. Because it is happening. Right? There is zero doubt in my mind that is happening. I got plenty of doubts, folks. I got plenty of doubts. I got doubts about lots of things. I'm not afraid to express my doubts. Are there extraterrestrials engaging the planet? 100% certainty. Are human beings being engaged, possibly in an induction manner and other ways? 100% certainty. Are there people on the Hill that know this? Yes. Are there government scientists that know this? Yes. They told me so. Are there journalists that know this? Yes. They told me so. About 6 months ago, I was invited to a party of some physicists in Bethesda. Right? These guys work at the labs. And there's lots of labs in that area. So they tend to live in Bethesda. Now, GS 15, 16 year-old scientists, they make about $180,000 a year. Many of them have working spouses. Or vice versa. There are women that are working for the labs. But whatever, the couples are bringing home $280,000, $290,000, $300,000 a year. They live in $1 million houses in the Burning Tree area of Bethesda. That's near the Burning Tree Country Club, all male, where all the members of Congress and the Senate go out there to play golf and whatever else they do. And so these physicists like to get together and party, and you go over there, and you know what you find out? You know what they talk about when they're at a party? They talk about UFOs. And they got big libraries, right? They know about it. But let me ask you something. If you're making $300,000 a year and living in a very tony part of Bethesda in $1 million house, you're going to rush down to the New York Times and say, hey, yeah, I know about those ETs, okay? Just want to let you know, okay? Here's my ID badge. Okay, I work for the Navy labs. All right, come on down. Pay me attention. Come out to my office. I'll give you an interview. Guess what? The people in government know, too. Some of them know directly because they worked on a program. Some of them know indirectly because the people that worked on the program told them. Some are one step out of that because they overheard something. And then there's another bigger group that just figured it out for themselves. They know, right? So, well, if they know, what's the big deal? That's very interesting. Very interesting. And then, I'll finish up here on that. About 6 months ago, this same group, I'd gone to visit a couple of times and chatted. I think I was invited. It was a get to know. You know, they wanted to feel this guy out, see what he's like, right? Is he idiot? Is he nuts? Is he insane? What is he? In case we have to deal with him or whatever. And that's cool, right? And I went, and they're very nice people. But they wanted me to come to a little party. It was a dinner party, about 7 or 8 people, and there was somebody there they wanted me to meet. I said, okay. And they told me generally who it was, so I kind of knew who it was. I went there, and this is one of these people, they just kind of had come part of the group, right? But he wasn't a scientist. He was kind of a different guy. This guy was a well-retired, 30-year Army Intelligence Command Sergeant Major. I'm not talking about Robert Dean, okay? This is the classic, you know, Sergeant Major guy, okay? Had his lovely wife there, been, retired maybe about 10 years. 10 years? Maybe a little longer than that. He looked like he was in his mid to upper 60s. In any event, he was Army intelligence to the core. Went all the way back to Vietnam and Cambodia, right? Thailand. He had done it all. He had worked for Alexander, good old John. He'd worked for Stubblebine. He'd worked for all of the really cool inside intelligence guys on all the cool stuff, including ETs. And I think the whole reason for me to be there was that we had a brief discussion. The scientists were pushing him real hard because I think this is kind of a joke. They always do. They push him to tell him more, tell me more, tell me more. And he always, I can't tell you that. But he let me know, all right, and them, but they'd already heard it before, that are there extraterrestrials? Yeah. Have there been crashes? Yes. Have bodies been recovered? Yes. All right. Now, let me tell you something about this guy. First of all, he wouldn't testify before Congress if you put a gun to his head. Secondly, he hates Kerry. He voted for Bush. He's right-wing. He has no interest in the cover-up. He has no interest in telling it. But we had a little meeting, and he told me that. And I don't know why. Maybe it was a validation thing, whatever. And then, because they were pushing him so hard to get something out of him, he needed to kind of put something else out there. And so he said, well, look, there's something else I'll tell you that you might get a kick out of. And I said, okay. And he said, everybody sort of has a sense of where the center of activity is in the United States regarding ETs and the government, right? Regarding the government's programs or ETs. Everybody sort of has a sense. Some people think it's Wright-Patterson, and some people think it's Area 51 or whatever. And he says, it's none of those places. I said, well, where is it? He says, it's West Virginia. It's in West Virginia. I said, okay. And that was it. We had Chinese food. Had a great home. I went home. The next day, I made a call. Called up Richard Souter, underground basis. Richard will be talking at the X conference, along with Stanton Friedman, who'll be here next week, and about 25 other people. And I said, let's talk about West Virginia. And Richard confirmed that West Virginia has a number of NSA facilities, big ones. It has a number of underground facilities that are known, including the very famous underground facility that was built for Congress, right, to house it in case of a nuclear war, which eventually was, it's not in use, and eventually they actually showed it to the public and they took tours. And so West Virginia is a very good potential place for major activity. And more importantly, it turns out that the mountains of West Virginia are particularly dense. The rock in that area, that region, is extremely dense. So when you get down underneath it, nothing penetrates down below. Okay? And then I remembered something. This is kind of cool. Later that day, I remembered something, a story that a good friend of mine, a supporter of PRG, had told me maybe 3 years before. So I called up Jim and I said, what was that story you told me back, Christmas time, 1999, whatever, about the trip you took to West Virginia? And he says, oh, yeah. So he retells this. And this is the story. Great story. You're going to love this story. My friend Jim and a good friend of his from college, they known each other for 20 years, went camping in West Virginia. Jim's one of these guys that, he goes out, he climbs mountains, he snowmobiles. If he breaks his leg, he simply, puts a splint on it and then goes on about his business. He's one of these kind of alpha guys, and he's really a cool guy. I like him a lot. And so they went out to camp, not one of those resort camps. They went out deep mountains of West Virginia. But first they had to go by his friend's father's house, who is a kind of I think he's a scientist, or he might be a government guy, but he lives in West Virginia, I forget the town, and they visited him for a while, and they joked about the UFO stuff, because Jim's big in the UFO stuff, and his friend's father has nothing to it. It's utterly ridiculous. There's nothing to this. And they always joke about this, and then they went off. So they go out in deep West Virginia. So they're out there, and about, I think it was early in the morning, about 9 o'clock, they're setting up camp, and suddenly, they're kind of up on a ridge, and suddenly, in comes an airplane, right, at very low level, almost tree level, and it just kind of skims across the trees, low in the valley, and then it suddenly starts to pull up. And as it pulls up at the other end of the valley, about 30 guys jump out with parachutes, right? And so this is a specialized kind of jump. So you'd think it's a training mission. The quick is you got to get out quick on a plane that's ascending And so you're in the air for a short amount of time, whatever. And then they parachute down into the other end of this pretty large valley. And they watch that, and yeah, that's pretty interesting. That's pretty cool. So they thought about that, and by later that day, they're thinking, we need to check this out. And so they decided to go and go that way, and they just headed out, and they had a long ways to go. So they head out toward the end of this valley, many, many miles down the way, and they don't really get there until later at night. It's dark, right? It's about 8, 9 o'clock, and we're talking in the middle of nowhere, so we're talking dark. And so they decide they're going to camp for the night, and maybe the next day they'll kind of look around and see what's going on. And a little later that night, all of a sudden, on a kind of a flat area, still a ways away from them, but obviously much closer than they were earlier that day, a bunch of lights come on, right? Lights that are kind of up on standards. And they see a lot of men around, right? Again, in the distance, but they can make out that there's men, and they can make out these lights. And they go, well, that's cool. Obviously, these are the guys that jumped out of the plane. And they're sitting there and watching that, and all of a sudden, from the left comes a very, very large disc. We're talking several hundred feet. This isn't a 30-footer. This is several hundred. This is large. And this thing just comes cruising in and just sits right over the top of where these lights are, and these guys are underneath. And they can make out the lights kind of going around, like this, just a little light going around. And they just stood there, they're standing there in the woods in the dark, looking out at this, dumbfounded. And I said, well, Jim, did you go for it? I mean, did you just get going and head right for it, like Dreyfus did in Close Encounters of the Third Time? He said, no, we did not. We packed up and got the hell out of there is what we did. And that's what they did. They went home. They kind of camped down, kept their lights off, left that day, and went back to his friend's home, where they then told the father about this, right? This extraordinary sighting. This is classic stuff. And I know this fellow very, very well, and I absolutely guarantee you he is not lying, all right? Can't prove it, but it doesn't matter. He's not lying. I know liars. I've met many. This man is not lying about this. So they told the father about this, and he's going, what are you talking about? This is ridiculous. And so they had sort of a awkward kind of conversation, and then they left. And the son went off to, I think, where he lived. They don't live in the same town, and Jim went home. And he'd had other sightings before. Jim's kind of an interesting guy, and he's had a lot of things happen to him. He may very well be a contactee, I don't know. But he's a very accomplished guy, brilliant computer guy, made lots of money, $150,000 a year, that kind of stuff. So that's almost the end of the story, except 30 days later, right? He gets a call, about 30 days, he gets a call. And it's from the father of his friend that went camping with him. And the father says, look, I don't know what it means, but I felt the least I could do was to call you. About a week ago, a whole bunch of people in the community here, which is a fairly rural town, West Virginia, right, came back and reported to the authorities and to the newspapers that they saw a 200-foot disc hanging over the end of the valley at some point, I don't know what time of day it was, for a short amount of time. Not that day. It was a different time. This was a couple of weeks later. And I just wanted to let you know that. And that was the end of that story. Like 1,000 stories that you've heard, isn't it? But that was in West Virginia. And so 3 or 4 years later, a command sergeant major, retired intelligence guy, tells me that the heart of the government interaction with this issue, whatever the hell that means, oops, sorry, didn't mean to say that in St. Innocent, whatever that means is in West Virginia, which is just close enough to D.C. to be easily accessible, but far enough away that, and rural and remote enough that you have some privacy. Interesting stuff, isn't it? So, where are we here? Okay? It's been 58 years since Roswell, since Arnold. You did your job, you proved it, all right? And you reproved it, and you proved it again. You're sort of like a jury that sits through a 2-year trial and finds the defendant guilty, and they say, we're going to do it again. So they sequester you for 2 more years, and they try the person again. You find them guilty and say, we're going to do it again. And after about 8 or 9 times, you are really looking for a change of venue here. I mean, you're not a happy camper, all right? Who wants to reprove and reprove the same thing over and over again? Nobody wants to do that, but you've had to do that. Why you've had to do that? We know why you've had to do that. Okay? Because this isn't a scientific issue, and it hasn't been for a long time. It hasn't been a scientific issue since 1949. All right? I don't care how many photographs you have. I don't care how many PhDs you have. I don't care how many videos you've got. I don't care how many trace cases you have. I don't care what your evidence is. The United States government will not acknowledge it because this is a political problem. It is the problem how to go from a world where there are no extraterrestrials to a world where they're a matter of fact and do it in such a way the government looks good and generally the consequences are not too severe. Something that happened to coincide with an extraordinary Cold War and the building of nuclear weapons and mass destruction and the potential for no global winter and the whole 9 yards. I mean, it was a really tough 50 years. They had a tough problem, and I don't deny that they had a problem, and I don't really think they did necessarily the wrong thing in keeping it a national security matter in the 40s and 50s and what have you. That's why I don't like to call it a cover-up. A cover-up implies the hiding illegal activity from proper authority from the public. I don't think the initial cover-up was in fact illegal. That's why I call it a truth embargo. At some point, it starts to go from being a truth embargo to a cover-up. It starts to get a little hairy, and it's been in that position since 1991. And they did illegal things, which is not to say that the truth embargo was illegal, but they did illegal things. I don't care what your motives. You don't kill an American citizen who's innocent because it's convenient for the national security interest. And they do it. Believe me, they do a lot of things. That's wrong. But the embargo was probably justified, all right? The world was a mess in 1947, surprisingly, after we won that wonderful war. Went so well for us, and then things got bad. And so, here we are, 2005. What's going to happen next? And I'll tell you what's going to happen next. Disclosure is going to happen next, right? This is the other tsunami that's coming. The population wave, the massive security state, disclosure is coming. And after 9 years, I've decided to become a little bit more vocal about what that means. I have hedged my bets. I've sort of held my punches a little bit, pulled my punches a little bit on this. But I think it's time to get more public about this because a political movement is going to have to start here. And I've said this before. Some of you have heard me say it before. I'm going to keep saying it over and over again until, enough people listen and it happens. It's like, well, maybe you'll just stop because it's the wrong thing to do. There's no question a political movement has to begin here. No question at all. It's a question of when enough people figure it out. And again, I'm not here to pick on you, folks, believe me. But first, let's get something, I think, out of the way. A lot of people have opinions about this phenomenon. A lot of people have opinions about extraterrestrials. A lot of people have opinions about what they're here for and all that stuff. And that's fine. And if you look at it all, you get kind of a pastiche, a sort of kind of a mosaic. But there are patterns in this mosaic, particularly if you step back far enough. And here's what I think everybody in the United States, including every member of MUFON, needs to know. All right? 1. Everybody has got it wrong. In other words, everyone that has told you how this is wrong. Not completely wrong. They've got some things right, for sure. But have they got it all right? Not a chance. Okay? So when the truth is finally known, when and if it will be, and I think it will be, you'll find that everyone had a little bit right and a little bit wrong. And if you can kind of figure out what's most likely, and you take it all and you put it together, you get a picture. That's the first thing you need to know. And the second thing, I think, is that a fair analysis, a reasonable and an objective analysis of the evidence that has been amassed for 57 years makes it clear that disclosure is not going to bring a paradise on earth. It is not going to bring the new consciousness or necessarily a new paradise. It will bring a new paradigm, right? But it is not going to bring utopia or nirvana. And in fact, almost certainly, it's going to bring some very unpleasant facts, circumstances. It's going to be difficult. It is not going to be easy. It was a little self-serving, a little convenient to think that way, and I was quite inclined to do that early on, because you want to get people involved in something. If you want to be an activist, you want to have a positive message, and I think I do have a positive message. But you try to keep it as positive as possible, and so you kind of do a little triage. You throw that out, put that aside, and you kind of keep the focus on the upbeat. But the fact is, it isn't all upbeat. All right. In fact, it's going to be pretty unpleasant, but it's also going to have some good things. It's going to be a mixed bag, but it's not going to be fun. All right? Some people will be elated for a while, and then it'll start to settle in, and then they'll start to think, and then they'll realize, oh boy. All right? And the sooner we start thinking that way, the better. Now, there are those who believe that these extraterrestrials are absolutely saints who have come here to do wonderful things, and they're going to be very offended when they hear me say this, and I'm sorry. But I'm just going to tell you what I believe. I have no reason to tell you anything else. The evidence is quite clear that these entities have very complex agendas, right? And that there are a whole host of very tough things we're going to have to face. Number one, there is a pretty good probability that arrangements have been made with these entities by our own government. Gifts have been exchanged, promises have been made. I think the odds are well above 50% at this point. It is just hard to get away from it. So, you've got to imagine a world in which you're going to learn that the government has struck deals. The secret government has struck deals, right? People you didn't elect, you certainly didn't appoint, you don't even know who they are, have made deals with other beings from other planets that have impact upon your life. The deals can be almost anything. The most common one in play is that an arrangement was made for the transfer of technology in return for access to people and their genetic material. Is it true? I don't know. Is it possible? Yes, very possible. Is it going to be upsetting? You betcha. All right? Because one of the things, and one of the most important aspects of this emerging issue, is that we have an unspecified number of individuals who are in the closet on this issue. One of the upsetting things about our country right now is that we still have a lot of closeted people. I don't think that was the intent. You have the right to be in the closet. You have the right to get in the closet and stay there all you want. Lock the door, don't come out. That's your privilege. But we don't want a country in which you're forced into the closet, and we have a lot of people there. And on this issue, that closet is getting really crowded. I mean, it's filled. It's filled with politicians and journalists and an unspecified number of contactees. And when disclosure comes, the closet doors are going to start opening, and a lot of people are going to come out, and they're going to be very, very unhappy. The social contract is going to take a huge hit if any deals have been struck. You need to be prepared for this. You do not want that contract to be broken. Bend it, but don't break it. Being prepared, talking in advance, working it out, thinking it through, which, you can do, but unfortunately the university system is not available to do right now. They have more important things to do. And the journalistic community, not prepared to do it, they have important trials to cover. Fortunately, since the Scott Peterson trial is over, they're able to immediately move over to the Michael Jackson trial, so they're in pretty good shape. They're very comfortable. But, yeah, Phil Spector's coming up soon. That's going to be very nice. And so I'm very happy for all of them. But as far as this issue is concerned, they don't know squat, all right? Though some of them know it's true. Really, I think what I want to say is they won't do squat. So those people are going to come out of the closet. Now, that's exopolitics. That's real exopolitique, all right? X numbers of tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of people who have been impacted in some way by extraterrestrials and that were assisted by their own government. You're also probably going to learn that these ETs are, in fact, dealing with us for reasons we don't understand, and they're dealing aggressively with us. Now, I'm not saying, I'm not trying to go too far here. I can't commit myself to Jacobs as the threat, that he is convinced this is a colonization process, because I don't think he can prove that or even show it yet. But it is a perfectly logical extrapolation from the information that he has, and needs to be examined very carefully. It needs to be examined in every university in the country. Okay? He's one temple, that's a start, but he's just about the only academic at that level in the entire nation. Are we at the level of colonization? I don't know. But genetic involvement, you betcha. Pregnancies, yes. Babies taken, almost certainly. This is not comfortable stuff. Be prepared for it. Now, other people have not had that happen to them. They've had some transcendent experiences, right? And they'll be a little more upbeat about this. And that's fine. It's okay. It's all right. It'll be a mixed bag. That's what I'm saying. But it's not going to be black or white. It's going to be both. But some of the black or white's not a good way to. I won't do it that way. It's not going to be good or bad. It's going to be a little both. But some of the bad's going to be very bad. Genetic material taken from people, women, impregnated, and so forth. This is not good. These are the kinds of things that you're probably going to find out pretty soon. These are the reasons why, part of the reasons why the government has a very difficult problem. Look, most of the people who started the cover-up are dead. So the people in power now can say, hey, we didn't do it, they're dead, they did it, they're gone. So that's good, that's helpful for them. But everybody who has been in power since has been part of this cover-up one way or another, and they're all attached to it to some degree. But most importantly, they're the ones that are going to be in the front line the day it happens, and they are very concerned about how they're going to be thought of. One of my good contacts told me a number of years ago that, in fact, this very issue was presented, and I can't prove this, it's okay, just for your consideration. This very issue was in fact presented to one of the top public relations firms in Washington, and some of the best in the world. I mean, these are the firms that handle Saddam Hussein, you know, after the war, or Saudi Arabia when the oil price goes up, or Martha Stewart, you know, or whatever. These are the people, and they're doing a great job with Martha, by the way. She's doing very well. These people are good at what they do, and they gave them the problem. How do we end the extraterrestrial truth embargo and look good? This is a very reasonable job, and if they pull it off, they should be paid handsomely. But that's the problem. It's a political issue with a public relation problem. All right? How are we going to look good? Now, one way to look good is to simply lie through their teeth. Now, I realize the government hates to lie, but occasionally it has to. And so you have this problem where the government will come out and disclose to you, and then it will fill you with a lot of baloney. And they'll try to cover up a lot of stuff. Now you're into real cover-up territory at that point. And who's to say they're not? I mean, where are the organizations with $20 or $30 million in their coffers that are prepared to stand up and say, just a moment, I don't think that's substantiated. Let's look at that, right? And if you don't look at that, we're going to challenge you in the courts and look at all the money we have to do that. There's nothing like that. There's nothing. There is no political structure. There are a lot of knowledgeable people like Steven Spielberg and others who have tons of money that are sitting there waiting for disclosure. They're going to cash in big. They'll do some even bigger movies. They'll form a think tank or two. They're going to be rolling, right? But they're not doing anything now because it would be inconvenient for them. Well, that's their problem. We have a different problem. We have a country here that we'd like to hang on to. We have a way of life that we'd like to improve. And we have a planet that's in deep trouble, as we've talked about. Because the other thing we haven't talked about, and I will briefly, because it also ties into the ET issue, I think, a little bit. The other tsunami that's heading our way, right, is the environmental degradation that you've heard about plenty, right? You know all about it. You've heard about it. Some of you don't believe it, and some of you do. Ain't no big deal. You know, no way a bunch of humans can mess up a whole planet. It's just not possible. Well, it wasn't in, 200 AD. It wasn't in 1100, right? In fact, all the terrible things that humans could do in the centuries between, say, the birth of Christ in 1980, you put them all together and they didn't affect the environment one diddly squat, nothing. But then, boy, we just couldn't leave well enough alone. And so we decided that, around 1900, we had 1 billion people, 1.5 billion people. It's like, wow, let's go for 3. A lot of great technology was coming that could have made 1 billion people really comfortable on the planet Earth. It was heading our way. It was coming right down the pike. Let's just keep it at 1.5 bill, and boy, are we set. And he said, now let's go for 3. And they had that by 1950. Then he said, okay, let's go for 6. So they did. By the time they hit 6 billion, they got a bunch of cars putting out carbon dioxide. They got their nostrils putting out carbon dioxide. But they're getting rid of a lot of trees, so they're trying to get those back. A little progress there, but overall plant life is going downhill. 1.5 hours remaining. Please. I couldn't. Yeah, I'll make that. I'll do better than that. I'll get done sooner than that. We're going to get a lot of questions. because y'all don't take breaks. I'm surprised. But I wouldn't keep you that long. But we got to get some questions. I got a lot of stuff here. Guess what? You know one of the most profound and dangerous environmental issues in the world is today that you don't know about? It's not the ozone, which is terribly bad. It's not the warming issue, which is not just human. It's also being created by the environment, but whatever. You know, it's like if you're standing in a pool and nature fills the pool up to here, you know, so you're standing there and the water's right underneath your nose. And then a human comes along with a hose and fills it up and takes it up to here. You know, you're just as drowned, aren't you? Right? So whose fault is it? Nature that filled it up to here or the human that took it to here? Okay? Either way, you don't want that to happen. Okay? So we've got a situation where we have major environmental issues that we hear about, and then we have one that we don't even get told about because it's so bad that even the environmentalists don't want to talk about it because they know that if you truly scare people into a fetal position, you can't deal with them. You know, it's hard to have a dialogue or form a political movement with a bunch of people that are curled up in the fetal position. So they don't talk about this one. You know what it is? Anybody guess? Nah, not it. Can we take another shot? Oxygen. Bada bing. The level of oxygen in the world has been going down for some time. Now you're thinking, that's worth paying attention to, because the last I heard, got to have that oxygen, all right? You know, in some cities, on some days, it drops as low as 6%. You know what it's supposed to be? All right, 21, 22. Have they done any studies of the effects on human beings who, for several million years, have been breathing 22, 23, 24% oxygen or even higher, who are now having to breathe 18, 17, 16? Anybody studies on that? Nah, they don't want to bother with that. They might find out the oxygen is going down. And when oxygen goes down, it has a number of effects, many of which are not even known, but some of them which are known. It causes shallow breathing, right? Which means it's very difficult to get oxygen in the blood, so you breathe like that. And when you shallow breathe like that, you tend to create a number of effects, not the least of which is you can get indigestion, and you can also get really stressed out. It causes tension. So the next time, you know, you cut somebody off on a freeway, and they pull up next to you and start pointing high-powered guns at you, throw them a bottle of oxygen. We are dropping the oxygen levels in the planet, and they're still going down, and there's no end in sight. If that isn't as bad as it gets, what is? We laugh at the fact that people in oxygen have oxygen bars. And in Mexico City, I mean, literally, I mean, sometimes you can't get from one block to the next without getting going to an oxygen place. How did it come to that? That's environmental degradation, folks. And you say, well, no problem. You know, we're going to fix all that. Well, who's fixing it? Who's talking about it? Who's doing anything? All right? Not doing anything about it. And so those are three tsunamis, and then the ET tsunami coming down the line. But the ET tsunami has got some good upside to it. It's floating some boats, all right? Now, what do I mean by that? In other words, it's coming in with some boats in front of it, kind of moving them towards you, and we may be able to climb in those boats and sail away. All right, so there may be an upside. The other three that I mentioned, I'm very concerned about the upside of the secret empire. I'm really concerned about the upside of environmental degradation. And as far as the population is concerned, well, boy, it's not good at all. But ET is an interesting thing. Why? Okay. Here's some of the good you can expect, hopefully, if you get the truth. And you're going to have to work really hard to get it, right? You're going to have to plan, and you're going to have to invest. And I'm talking the general you. I'm not picking on you all. You guys have been doing this for years. You're way ahead of the curve. That's why I'm talking to you. You know a lot. You know what's going on, so we can dialogue, we can talk. But, you know, we do need to educate the other, 250 million people in the United States that are not as knowledgeable as you, so the next time the water recedes, they don't run out and try to pick up those flopping fish. You know what I'm talking about? So let's talk about this just for a second. ET tsunami. After we've gotten over the shock of knowing that the government has lied, the government has misrepresented, the government has killed some people, the government has cut deals with aliens, after we get over the shock, the aliens have been dealing with us in a somewhat callous way. and a lot of us are going to be very upset about it. After we get over that, we're going to start to learn some other things, and we're going to start to reflect. And one of the things we're going to figure out real quickly, which is pretty obvious actually, is extraterrestrials are traveling through space in ways we can't even imagine in craft that are very large or even very small. They can travel extraordinary speeds, and they have a propulsion system and an energy system. And those propulsion systems and energy systems are not known. Philip Corso made it very clear that those systems were not in play. They didn't transfer that to anybody. They transferred some peripheral technologies, and it helped out our technological advancement in those years, benefited a lot of companies, a lot of stocks went up, I'm sure a lot of money was made, whatever, but we had a massive technological revolution that was wonderful. And it wasn't all just ET tech, believe me, but it was a little help, a little boost, no problem. And Phil was gracious enough to tell us about that before he passed away, and I'm very, very glad that he did. But there was nothing about the energy, and there was nothing about the propulsion. Stephen Greer made a decision a while back to try to take those two issues and bring them into this, for which he was soundly castigated. He was, well, you know, there's been a few people in this field more severely criticized than Stephen Greer. He has been brutalized. I'm starting to get some good stuff too, though. I'm getting some really good email, and it's starting to really pound on me, and I'm kind of liking that, you know? I can feel like, hey, I must be doing something right. I'm getting some really nasty email. But I actually, to be honest, I objected, and I said so, and I actually I was sort of persona non grata there, and it wasn't Stephen, it was other people in the think tank behind the May 9th press conference that occurred at the press club. And the thinking that went into it, going up to it, the decision was made to bring the energy and the propulsion, particularly the energy, into that press conference, and I opposed it. And I was a party of one. And a big brouhaha developed. Actually, it was Stephen that stepped in and said, look, that's not an unreasonable position, but we're going to do this. You all settle down, stop fighting, to his credit. But I felt it was a mistake because I knew that the energy systems and the propulsion systems and the space weapon issue was polarizing, and that this issue is fundamentally nonpartisan, and many of the witnesses had varying political positions. And so you bring in space weaponization and you're dividing the witnesses. Some of them are military. They were in favor of space weapons. And so now you're dividing them politically, you distract, and it was probably a mistake. But I know why he did it. Because after the press conference, they went up on the Hill, and they'd also made, to go up the Hill prior to that, and they were trying to use the energy and the propulsion system issue to get the members of Congress to pay a little attention. I mean, okay, look, I understand this ET thing is a little hard for you, but let's talk about energy for a second. And by that way, they could get in the door. Remember, these doors have been closed. These fine men and women who we pay a very large amount of money to have not been performing well lately. In fact, for about 25 years. They just don't almost do anything anymore, and one of the reasons is that they got the doors closed on so many things. In fact, one of the problems of late is that they take their fax numbers out of the system. So you call up, you say, can I have the fax number? You say, we don't give that out. You know, now why don't they do that? Well, you see, they're very smart people on the Hill. They discovered that if you publish a fax number to the office on the web, somebody is going to send you a fax, right? In fact, you get lots of faxes. So, you know, you're there, you know, you got a great pension plan, you got underground parking, you get some FaceTime on television, you're making $200,000 a year, you're considered a member of the power elite, and all of that is being interrupted by these damn faxes that keep coming in from people wanting to know what you believe about this or telling you about that. It's really very irritating, and so they just stopped putting the number out. The whole email thing was a problem for a while, and finally, as we know, email is not good for that kind of thing, right? We all know that every day we get about 20 requests from members of the Nigerian royal family to broker $20 million, and so we sort of understand that the members of Congress, they ain't reading those emails. So you can send them an email, it don't matter. They're not going to read that. So we give them a pass on that one. You can mail them something, but it's expensive, but you can mail them. But the fax, I love that fax. When they're starting to go, I got that fax. So, you know, what's going on is, you know, they want to rule, they just don't want to have to deal with the, you know, the nuts and bolts of ruling. And as a result, things are getting done. They just don't get done, right? We spent $900 million, I think, on this presidential election cycle. Was it $1 billion? It's about $1 billion. Did we get $1 billion worth of new ideas, new dynamism? I don't know. We'll find out. But certainly as you go back in time, the last 20 years, we did win the Cold War. We spent about $14 trillion to do it, okay? How have we done since? The record is spotty. Anyway, the point is that Greer was trying to get to these people, and I think it was a reasonable thing to do. And while he took heavy hits for it, fundamentally he was right. And I'm more than happy to take up that mantle. And here's why. Look, well, it's simple. We talked about the tsunami that's coming our way. Now, it would be nice if I had, a recommendation here, I mean, you don't want to hear me say, yeah, you've got a reality tsunami coming and you're all going to drown. I mean, that's a rotten message, right? I'm going to pay that guy to come in and tell us that. Take away that money and get that cake out of the way. He's not going to have any of that after the show. I want to hear some possibilities here. Well, let's talk about them. Let's talk about that energy system. Now, there are people that don't believe we have those craft. They're wrong. There are people that don't believe that we've figured out some of that technology. They're wrong. There's just too much evidence to the contrary, some of which is public, some of which is not. Take my word, they're wrong. I think we've even flown those craft. I think we even have films of that. So we've either flown their craft or our craft. So we've figured out some propulsion issues. We've figured out the energy issue. And the energy is profound, all right? Whatever it is. I don't care how they do it. It's profound, right? If you can get into your Lexus or whatever you got out there, probably not a Lexus. Probably we're talking, a nice Civic or whatever. You can get in that Civic, and you can put some gas in that puppy, and you can get it up to 4,000 miles an hour and then take immediate non-inertial right turn. You got yourself a fine engine, okay? You got yourself some serious tech there. It's better than a four-cylinder, all right? A lot better. Now, what does that mean? Let's take a moment and think about that. How are we going to save ourselves from being drowned in this century? Well, we need to reform a lot of things. We need to do with overpopulation. We've got to become global citizens, which is where we're all headed anyway. That's not one world. That's not New World Order. That's global citizens. You get to be a citizen of Georgia, a citizen of the United States. You get to be a citizen of the earth. You get 3 citizenships. No big deal. But you think like a global citizen, which is helpful at times, right? And so what are the implications as a global citizen of this technology? Let me just give you 2, all right? Just 2. Water. If you read the Global Trends 2015 report that was put out by our own CIA, this is just the unclassified version of it, right? There's always a classified section, right? And generally, the classified section has the really bad news. The unclassified section is a little mixed bag. Now, that Global Trends 2015 is available on the CIA website. You go to the NIC section, that's the National Intelligence Committee section, which is kind of a cross-intelligence group, which is where I think possibly some of MJ-12 may be lodged, or where it's the group I would use to start the disclosure process through to the executive, but whatever. Under the NIC section, you'll find the published papers. Go find the Global Trends 2015. They basically, here's what's going to happen between now and 2015. And when you read it, there's only one proper response, okay? What are the prices of condos in Australia? That's the response, okay? Go find out, get yourself a condo, change your name, leave the system, because things are going to get really, really bad. Fights, wars over food, wars over water, increased terrorism, possible biological events, possible nuclear events. Don't even think about a nuclear bomb going off in this country. People say, well, so they blow up Baltimore. We can maybe lose Baltimore, right? The Orioles I think the Orioles didn't even make it in the top 50%, right? They didn't make the playoffs. So, we lose Baltimore. No. I'm from Washington. In the last 6 months, at least a half a dozen members of the government at one level or another have pointed out that the greatest threat now facing the United States is in a nuclear event by terrorists. And generally, they don't talk about things like that because it's bad press. So when they do talk about it, you need to pay attention. So when you got somebody in defense, or you got somebody at state, or you got somebody at commerce or whatever, or you got some think tank person from Heritage, which is, conservative, and they're saying, yeah, the thing you really need about is a nuclear event going off, it's good to pay attention to that. And it obviously would be bad if you were in that particular place, but let's say you're not. Let's say the nuclear bomb goes off in Memphis and you live in Atlanta. You got a problem? Yeah, you kind of do. Everybody's heard about the FEMA camps, right? Those camps that they say are being built by FEMA out there? And people believe they're building them to put political prisoners and whatever. right? Terrible thing. Some people even believe that the people will be rounded up by the United Nations Army, which will come pouring down from United Nations land, and they're going to put them in these camps. It's nonsense. There are camps, though. So why are they there? Why did they build those camps? Is it some terrible, nefarious thing? Some evil thing? Actually, it's a pretty reasonable thing. Here's why they built those camps. If one of those terrorists manages to get their hands on one of those 20,000 nuclear warheads we neglected to dismantle after we won the Cold War, or the other bunch of nuclear we don't even know about, okay, and I don't care what, it could be just 1 kiloton, just doesn't have to be particularly big, just, decent, reasonable nuke. 1 kiloton, by the way, is chump change now, but it was big back in 45, and they blew up, say, Memphis. The first thing that happened is about 90% or more of every single person living in a reasonable sized city in the United States will immediately jump in their car and get the hell out of town. Okay? Because what do you think they're thinking? They're going to blow up my city next. I'm not staying here. And if I'm a terrorist and I have just 1 nuclear bomb, I'm not stupid. I will blow up Memphis, but I will make sure that some website somewhere in the Middle East mentions that, 5 more cities are going to be going next week. I don't need to have the bomb. The effect will be quite profound. And so you're going to have most of the people in the United States leaving the cities and pouring out. 100 million people driving around the interstates looking for a Motel 6. I'm not kidding, folks. That is what they're afraid of, and they should rightfully be afraid. They don't have to blow the country up. They just have to scare us to death. And people say fear is really, the mind killer. But, a nuclear bomb is very effective to get your attention. And so those camps are there to help house people who they have not been able to contain within the other cities through martial law. That's the tsunami. That's just one little wave of the tsunami that's heading your way, and I'm not even getting warmed up. And I am not an alarmist, and I'm not a catastrophist. I am basically telling you what your own government is saying in reports that get a little bit of press, but not a lot. Did you hear about the Defense Department report? This isn't from Rupert. This isn't from, crazyconspiracy.com. This is from the Defense Department saying that they think that maybe those global warming projections are maybe on target, maybe even a little conservative, and in fact the potential for a major increase in the water height, possibly putting great parts of England underwater, could happen in 10 years. Did you happen to catch that report? What? Now, you see, if I'm in Florida, I'm going, England is at sea level, and I'm at sea level, and that's not good. You know what, Danny Sheehan's, I like Danny Sheehan. I haven't been able to see him in a long time because he's got 4 degrees from Harvard, so he's constantly working. I only have 1 degree, and it's from a little college in Florida. The point is that Danny's a very powerful guy, and he's a very busy guy. And one of his major jobs, which he still had for some time, he had it for a long time, is he is a principal representative, legal representative for the, I don't know the exact name, it's kind of like the Council of Island Nations, or the Group of Island Nations, because there's a lot of island nations out there. Sri Lanka's an island nation, right? Australia's an island nation, and so forth, so forth, and so forth. And Malaysia is just one big collection of islands, so it's kind of an island nation. Anyway, they've kind of got together, and they hired Danny, and I think some other people, to go to all the think tanks and go to the big forums and so forth, and kind of pay attention and kind of point out that these nations are kind of concerned about being underwater. All right, and that's what he does. He gets paid for that. That's an interesting job, isn't it? They're paying good money because they're afraid about being underwater. That doesn't sound like wild-eyed conspiracies. It sounds like governments being conservative and looking ahead, right, for that tsunami that's heading their way. So Global Trends 2015 is predicting just hell on earth. Now people say, well, no, there's some good in there. Okay, fine, it's hell on earth with some good in there, right? Is that what you want? That's what your own government is telling, and that's 2015. Let's don't even get past that. Let's don't go to 2025. We don't want to go there. All right? I may live to be that long, but all of your kids are going to live to be that long. So, to live that old. So, what does that have to do with ETs? Let's start with 2 things. The energy systems that drive these craft are able to create energy at an efficiency level that is way, way over anything we have. Okay, fine. Well, what does that mean? Everybody talks about free energy. Forget it. There's going to be no free energy, right? They're going to meter that sucker. You can count on it, right? Are the oil companies going to get poor? No. They're going to get in the free energy business, but they're going to meter it and they're going to sell it to you. But they're going to sell it to you at 5 cents on the dollar, and you're going to be happy to pay for it. The rich are going to stay rich, the powerful will stay powerful, but energy will be cheaper. And all this hocus pocus about the fact that it'll disrupt the economy is all nonsense. Donald Trump is still going to be living in a penthouse after disclosure. The rich will stay rich. That's what they do. All right? But the energy will be available. And this energy is so incredible, just on the basis of what it's able to do with those craft, that it probably has the ability to do something so simple it might escape you. And that is, it has the ability to break the economic barrier that prevents the conversion of seawater to fresh water in an inexpensive and economical way. In fact, it could be virtually costless. Which means that we could set up desalinization plants all around the world, or even desalinization ships. Do you remember the desalinization ship that went out to the Indian Ocean? They actually brought in a ship, and all it did was convert seawater. They have these giant systems in there, and it converts seawater to fresh water, and then raising the level of economics and consumerism in the world to solve population is just about the dumbest idea in the universe. They probably are laughing about this all the way across the galaxy, right? These people are going to do it that way when there's so many easy ways to do it, you know? So, in fact, there's a lot of, whatever. So, landfills. You know, what are we going to do? We all love recycling, don't we? Don't you just love the 9 containers? You got the paper, you got the cans, you got the glass, you got the aluminum foil, you got the wax, the non-wax, and you get all that stuff and you move it down there and you just know that they just take it and throw it in the landfill anyway, right? And after all of this effort, all the expenditure of the Sierra Club, I think we're up to about, what, 11% recycling? But we're making progress, right? Meanwhile, the landfills and some of the garbage is literally filling up the trenches offshore and washing back in. So, what has alien technology got to do with that? Guess what? Everybody knows about incineration. Everybody knows that there have been a number of attempts to start companies that incinerate waste, particularly nuclear-type waste or hospital waste and so forth. And a lot of people get upset about that because they're concerned about residual stuff. It's really very simple. If you create a furnace hot enough, you're able to reduce anything, right? Beer bottles, plastic containers, anything, to base elements. Right and down to the oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, whatever. You get it down to base elements, some of which is gas, and it just kind of, you can just siphon it off and use it. Mostly it's good stuff. But you have to get the temperatures high enough. And we don't have that ability. We can't do it. We can build a furnace which is capable of taking anything you got in a landfill right now and reduce it, but it would cost a fortune. But with the ET technology, that's different. ET technology is efficient enough that we'll be able to create a furnace so hot that rather than have to bury this stuff in the ground and then build a school on it, we're simply going to burn it. Then we'll take the oxygen and hydrogen and other things and we'll actually recycle that. In fact, the oxygen we really need, as you know. And so consequently, we'll be able to make utterly clean all of the stuff which is now polluting and going into our groundwater. That is transformative environmentally. It would be a major event, and the only thing that's preventing us from doing that or building those desalinization plants is that you can't know about that technology or have access to it, because if you did, that would end the cover-up, and they're not ready, the truth embargo, sorry, they're not ready to end the truth embargo. And let's don't get into the propulsion systems, right? You got the propulsion systems. Well, let me tell you a little story. And I think this is the reason why I didn't get a response from him when I asked him to come to the X conference this year. Last year I got a polite, I really can't come. This year I got nothing. I really admire this guy, though, and I've said so many times. Edgar Mitchell appeared at the Roswell Festival, gave a nice little speech, pretty much a standard thing. Got a little more personal this time, talked about, his childhood, born in Roswell. How about that? And, how he got to be an astronaut and so forth. And he got into a lot of transpersonal stuff and some of the things that led him to make, I found the IANS, the Institute for Noetic Sciences and so forth. And he also talked about the ET issue, as he always does. He has a limited thing that he says. And he talked about the fact that he's been told by insiders that, in fact, there is extraterrestrial presence and that Roswell was the real deal and so forth and so forth. And he happened to mention, I don't know if it was new or not, It might have been a slip, but he may have probably said it before. I haven't heard everything that Edgar has said, but Dr. Mitchell said that he was pretty convinced that they had technology from those vehicles, and that they were dealing with it one way or fashion, probably in underground facilities, of which there are many. So, at the end, I had to ask him a question, and I confess that I was trying to trick him. I was trying to get a straight answer from him, because if he had answered me straight, I was going to take that answer and I was going to take it around the world, all right? Because I'm a political activist, that's what I do. I'm nonviolent, but if I get an opening, I'm going to take it. And so basically the question I asked Dr. Mitchell was this. Dr. Mitchell, you believe that in fact technology of extraordinary abilities, energy propulsion and so forth, have been available to the U.S. because of aliens, craft and so forth, crash vehicles, and there are others that believe the same way. Does it not trouble you as an astronaut that while we've had access to that kind of technology, possibly even testing craft, vehicle saucers, we've been sending our astronauts up to space on exploding chemical rockets and flying them back on floating hot plates, right? And that we've lost 14. Does that trouble you? And I was hoping that he would say, yes, it does. And that answer I would have taken around the world. But he's a very smart man, and he caught himself. All of the astronauts are intensely loyal to NASA, particularly those that were taken to the moon. You know, I mean, if you're given the opportunity to go to the moon and walk on it, by an organization and that spends that kind of money, and you come back, you don't want to upset or trash that organization. And NASA is caught in this cover-up, big time, and it's a terrible dilemma, but it's really not its fault in a sense. I mean, it's stuck there by the way that it was formed in the Space Act or the wording of that Space Act. So they're in a spot, but he's an astronaut, he's got a loyalty, and he's not going to do it, and he never has. And he realized if he had said yes, he would be implying that NASA had allowed astronauts to be killed because of technology it would not demand from the national security structure. Instead, he said that he was unaware of any technology that might be available that NASA could have used, and was sure that they were doing the best that they can, end of subject. And then when I asked him, so I think he was a little upset with that question. Boy, they mean business, don't they? They're not going to tell you, even if it means some astronauts have to die. Some of the best people in the world, right? They're the best. They're the absolute cream. Educated, open-minded, willing to explore, willing to take enormous risks, want to see the universe, see space, and bring that information back to you. And they would die because this embargo can't be ended because it's uncomfortable, not only for them, but perhaps for us. What could we do with that propulsion system? My Lord, where would you begin? I mean, in terms of, you could take some of all the nuclear waste, which they still haven't dealt with, by the way, another little piece of that wave heading your way. We're going to put it in Yucca Mountain, but that ain't happening. And so it continues to build up in all those reactor facilities in giant embedded drums, thousands and thousands of tons of nuclear waste just waiting for a disaffected person from a political sect to come over and blow up. Right? They can't deal with it. They still don't know, right? Guess what? With the propulsion systems that we happen to see flying around almost every day somewhere in the world, they could build some basic craft that would take that stuff and fly it into the sun. End of problem, right? Okay? And that's true of depleted uranium and everything else. So these are just a few, and believe me, I can go on. I could go on and on and on. So you need to know that there's an upside to this, right? And this upside is not, about, gee, if we get disclosure, I think my stock options may get better. They may go down. It depends on what you're holding. By the way, start thinking post-disclosure in terms of your stock holdings, all right? Right? If you're holding something that could be hurt by disclosure, sell it. Buy something else. By the way, 2 years ago, you could have gone to England and gotten 1,000 to 1 odds that in that calendar year that you placed the bet, that the British government would acknowledge the presence of extraterrestrials to the British citizens. About 2 years ago, those odds were dropped to 100 to 1. because too many people were placing that bet. Have you got some money? I don't. But if you do, you know, extra cash, decent money, you know, not the rent. Go put about $1,000 down for 2005, 2006, 2007. Just cover those years, right? Maybe 2,000 if you want to get ambitious. Cover that bet, even at 100 to 1, all right? So here we have this situation where some of the worst problems facing the Earth, macroscopic stuff, the kind that you don't impact in your daily life until finally it hits you. Boom, you know? Boom, it just flies through the window like a 737. And you were doing so well, you know? You had a $2 million condo. You had a Cadillac. Your kids are in private school. You got a nice portfolio, great pension plan, good company. And then reality shows up in the form of a 737 flying through your window, and you're going, now, well, why did that happen? Did I miss something? Right? Can we theoretically kind of work that over and see if we can sort of make that disappear? You get it? You see what I'm saying? Now, no, you're not going to have an airplane fly through your window. Something else may turn up. But in fact, most of you are the people that I talked about. You are standing on the beach. You will see the water recede, and you will take action. But I'm inviting you to do more. I'm inviting you to start thinking about taking action even sooner than that. Not wait for the water to recede. Act now, all right? And there's two things I'm suggesting. The simplest is spread the word. If you're in the closet, consider coming out. We have 14 people here, probably half of them are out of the closet, half of them are in. Consider coming out. No, it's not easy. But there's a lot of people already out, and they'll help you. Even on the issue itself, start speaking up for it. Start talking about it with other people. Spread the word. At least about the ET thing, all right? Watch the ABC News documentary on the 24th. Know that the ratings will be extraordinary. 20, 25, 28 million people are going to watch it. Know that the other network executives are going to go, hello, right? And they're going to start making their own documentaries because it's happening, right? And guess what? If they really butcher this issue in that documentary, which I don't think they have, they will get a deluge of nasty mail like anything they have ever seen, because they may or may not know that the audience out there is very aware, has been following it for years, and is not going to put up with it. So I think they're going to do a good job. All right, watch that documentary. Go to the conferences. But ultimately, there's something that has to happen. It's been coming for a while. We had the citizen science movement that started to morph into the process of disclosure, politics of UFOs, process of disclosure. The disclosure process is not a movement, it's a process, is what I call it. But it must become a political movement. It's got to become a political movement. And this is a tough one, but it has to happen, all right? And what do I mean by that? It's really simple. How many people watch the Bell Show? I listen to the Bell Show. Sometimes 3 million, sometimes 8 million. When he was really cooking, he had 10, 12 million. Believe me. This is before stream, all right? If you're watching or listening, I mean, you're listening to a show at 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, you're interested, all right? You're really interested. And millions did. How many people went to ET? 50, 60 million? Of the top 226 grossing movies, I think 32 deal with extraterrestrials in one form or another. Right? Tens of millions of people are interested. Tens of millions of people are following it. But that's all, because they don't see the tsunami coming. They're going, hey, this is cool. It's like Survivor, but cooler. I'm going to watch this, but I'm not going to get involved. There's nothing here for me to do. Wrong. We've got to have a political movement. If every single one of the people who have ever watched an Art Bell or Jeff Rentz or been to a MUFON meeting or been to a NICAP meeting were to take one Happy Meal out of their pocket, $10, and put it into a one or... Look, when you have been lying as much as the United States government has been lying, part of the reason for that is lying was at the center of the Cold War. The propaganda ideological battle that stood in front of the missiles, which we couldn't use, was basically profound professional lying. All right? We lied better than they, and we won. Now they're Russia and a bunch of republics. We just needed to stop, we need to step back and say, okay, the war's over, now let's get back to normal. Can do it. Couldn't do it. Couldn't stop the coercion, couldn't stop the special ops and everything else. And so now it's underground bunkers, it's hidden this, hidden that, and lie like crazy. They can't stop. So you got to stop them. You got to grab them. You got to slap them across the face. Say, okay, you can tell the truth now. It's all right. You don't have to lie anymore. The truth is cool. We like the truth. It's all right. You won. The Cold War's over. You don't have to lie. But they can't. They really can't. I'm telling you. I talk to people in Washington. You go, yeah, I can't do it. I can't do it. Let me tell you that, the people who are telling the truth? There's an emerging group of people, and I've been following for years now, who are what I call the phalanx of truth tellers. You frequently call them in another phrase. You call them by whistleblowers. Right? You know what a whistleblower is, and they actually passed an act to protect them, but the act is full of holes, right? It's kind of a sham, surprise. So you come out, and you go, I need protection. Fraud. Who were the whistleblowers that came out and nailed the people that ran Enron? It was the women that came forward first, right? Not the men. The men had to be dragged out and threatened with subpoenas before they turned. The women came out. So this is a process going anyway. I noted it, whatever. I'm not trying to pick on guys here. I'm saying emulate them. Let's get out there. Let's blow some whistles. Let's tell the truth. The point is that the lie situation now is so bad that it's not going to just change easily. It's not like, okay, let's start telling the truth. Let's start small though. All right. So let's not lie about the quality of that bread pudding in the congressional restaurant. Right? Let's tell them the truth. It stakes. Start with small stuff and let it happen and take a couple of decades and work up to it. We don't have the time. We need to get into the truth business. We need to get into it big. So if you're the government and you want to switch gears, you want to go from first to second gear, and you don't want to grind the gears. You want to get in the truth business big time. You want to make a big splash out of it, right? And so here's a good way to do it. End the embargo. Tell the world about the extraterrestrials and actually tell them the truth. Keep a few things out for national security, but tell them the truth and then support the process of examination. Right? Support the academics, support the think tanks, let them work it out, let us digest it, give us the truth. We'll be very appreciative. And then, having made that big splash, start telling the truth about some other things. We'll go, hey, that's good. Right? That's good. You're on a roll. Right? And then, if you're a politician, go on the hustings and go in front of the people and tell them the truth. You get elected. Pretty soon, people will start realizing you can tell the truth and get elected. Pretty soon, it becomes a habit. Now everybody's telling the truth to get elected. Okay? Now, you have two people in front of you, or maybe three if you're lucky, and they're all telling the truth, and you get to pick which truth you like. Boy, it doesn't get any better than that. How can it happen quickly enough so that the year 2015 isn't as bad as the CIA says it is, and that maybe England isn't underwater by the year 2014? Well, we need a big event, a big truth event, something with a lot of oomph. This is it. But they got a problem. They need some extra help. Now, that brings us to one last thing, and then I'm going to take all the questions you want. By the way, so I don't forget this, because I will. This is a first time here, right? So this is your first venue here. And so we have to start the new tradition, which I know where you had it before. There was some place you went afterwards, and you talked late into the evening. So now you have to find a new one close to here. If you all can figure out what that is, I'm prepared to go there after this is over, and I will talk as long as you want late into the night, okay? Because I'm leaving on a 7:30 train, and I'm just going to go to Union Station, and I'm going to work all night there, right? Because it wouldn't make any sense to go to a hotel. So I'm willing to go there. If you can decide what's a good after place, and that will be the tradition, and then you all go hang out there after every show. So let me finish with this. This is something I brought up at the MUFON symposium last July. I've talked to John Schuessler about it in person. He's very receptive. I think John's doing a great job with MUFON, given the issues and the limitations, trying to bring some life into it. I like John a lot. And obviously PRG is giving Walt Anders the PRG Hall of Fame Award. But it doesn't, that said, look, here's the way it is. MUFON is the best-known, largest organization in the world on this subject. You've earned your bones. You proved the presence of extraterrestrials many times over and published it in your journals. You had people go on television and defend it against the debunkers, most of which are idiots. Okay? And you held your temper. No one ever leaped out of a chair and grabbed Phil Klass by the throat. That was a significant accomplishment. Someday I'm going to be sitting across from Michael Shermer, and hopefully I will have the same restraint that you have. The point is, you did the job, but your organization is shrinking from 6 to 5 to 4 to 3,000 members. Why? Because you did your job, right? And it's hard to get people to come in to do it again. You want to do something new, right? I mean, what is new here? How many sightings can you investigate? Plus, lives are complicated now. People, you know, the early movement was driven by a lot of retirees, particularly military retirees. They had pensions and a comfortable life, and they could do this on the side. But increasingly, you got people, two working families. The mother works, the father works, the kids are working at McDonald's, the cats are being rented out. Everything has to be in play in order to pay the rent. It's hard to get people. So you got, what are you going to do? So you got this organization. It's the best known in the world. MUFON, this label is worth millions of dollars. It's known in Bangladesh, right? Russians know it. There is no better known organization. And you've been devoted to science since 1947. Here is what I'm asking MUFON to do. Somebody else will do it if you don't. Believe me, somebody will. But I think there's some importance, not only in the legacy, but in the information and the knowledge and the track record that it go forward in history, not simply replaced by some rich guy who come in with $20 million and start another organization from scratch and sign everybody up, right? We need this hook back in time to go forward and not be left behind like some rocket segment, you know, that got it into orbit and now it falls back into the atmosphere. I don't want MUFON to fall back into the atmosphere and burn up having done its job. What I want it to do is I want the board to meet and I want the board to make a decision that MUFON has, like every other 501(c), has the right under the law to a considerable amount of political activity. There are those who believe that 501(c)s can't do that. They are wrong. They're completely wrong. Every 501(c) that's dealing in issues of political import do this. Under the law, you can spend roughly 20% of every dollar you have on direct lobbying. You simply have to keep two sets of books so that the money can be separate. And then, interestingly enough, all informational work you do is not come under the heading of lobbying. So all of the journals and public awareness ads you might run and everything else, which could still have major political impact, doesn't come under the 20%. Right? Understand that your country right now is being shaped by hundreds of millions of dollars being run through 527s, and that's not going to change. You can't run this country without these advocacy groups. Do you think if you took all of those away and you simply left the Congress to understand these issues without any input, that these people up there could understand what the hell's going on? They can't even get their schedules straight. They can't even get their mistresses right. Right? They can't even defend themselves. They can't do it. That's why you have all this. It's called advocacy. Now, if somebody's advocating something awful, well, that's not good. But there are people spending a huge amount of money advocating good. That's good. So when somebody says to you, lobbying is bad and PACs are evil, keep in mind that almost means for certain that they have lobbyists and PACs working for them. They just don't want you to have one. They don't want you to hire anybody to represent your interests in Washington. They want to represent their interests. And if you all get together and put $10 in a PAC and have $20 million to work with, my Lord, you'll start to compete. And they don't want that. And so you've got this, sort of, what do you call it, disinformation out there that says that America would be better if there were no PACs and no 527 advocacy groups. And that's a load of crap. Okay? America would be better if people who have the interest of the country and the planet would get their own 527s and advocacy groups and get them in play. But they're not doing it. They're ceding all of their power to other entities and letting them run the country, but feeling good about the fact that they're not involved in this nefarious activity of advocating an issue by using money. And so they passed a campaign reform bill and everybody took a sigh of relief. It was a complete bogus nonsense. The amount of money spent on politics went up another 30%. It was all a scam. I sat there in the campaign in 2002, and I was asked about it, and I said it was a scam. The Republican and the Democratic candidate next to me said nothing. Of course they couldn't say anything. They helped create the whole darn thing. All right? Money is speech. Money is advocacy. You use it to get good policies, you get good policies. You do nothing, you get whatever you're given. So, if MUFON were to make the decision to say we have established the scientific base, we will continue to investigate as appropriate, but we're going to form a political arm, and we're going to go to the American people and say, I want you to join the most important and best-known organization in the world, not so you can train to investigate and go out and look at sightings in the outer areas of Montana, but so we can have your money to advocate for disclosure. People will do it, right? They may not have time to go investigate a sighting, but they can give you the $40 so you can go and advocate in Washington. How do you think ARP got to be what it is? You think that ARP got to be that big so you could get a little discount on your car insurance? ARP told those people, look, if you want your issues as an elderly American, an aging American represented in this town, Washington, D.C., you'll join this organization. Now, the most powerful lobby, one of the most 3 powerful lobbies in the country. So the people that are growing old are doing well. However, even with that power, they can still get, how would you say, bamboozled. All right? Even with that kind of power, they can still have it get away from them. Because democracy is not easy, as our president has said many times, and it never will be. But when you give up on it, you will take what you're given. Now, MUFON has an opportunity, but it has got to get going pretty quickly. I do not see any reason why this organization couldn't have 100,000 members before this year is out. All it has to do is go to the people with the right message and make the decision to add politics to its mandate. And you say, well, you can't mix science and politics. You know, there are a lot of people that believe that. There were people that believed, and they still believe, that it is the job of scientists to build the bombs that the politicians want, to build the biolabs that they want, to build the nuclear bunkers that they want, to build new nuclear weapons. Just announced last week in the Washington Post that we have a new program underway to design a new nuclear warhead that will last longer to replace the aging warheads that we have. And there's another program announced a year and a half ago to build new bunker-busting nuclear bombs so that the next time a Saddam Hussein hides in a spider hole, we can get him with a nuclear bunker buster. You got to ask yourself, is there really a need for nuclear bunker busters, or is there something underground that's really formidable that we need to go after? Are they building bunker-busting nukes to be able to go after underground alien bases? And if they are, would you like to know whether that's a good idea or not? Would you like to have a say, or you just let them do what they want to do here? You ready to have a war with the extraterrestrials? How do you feel you're going to do, right? How many picked the Phillies in the Eagles in the Super Bowl? Do you feel confident about that? Look, we may have to go to war with the extraterrestrials. But if we go to war, let the entire nation go to war. Don't let it be decided by about 35 guys in Washington, D.C., who have operating within the cloak of national security. Make the decision to go to war with extraterrestrials because it's in your best interest. And that's not what Jefferson had in mind. So, MUFON goes to the American people and says, $50 a year, join this organization. We're going to try to build on the science and bring in the politics because we don't believe that science and politics can be separate, right? Because it is not the case that scientists are just here to do what politicians tell them. The Manhattan Project physicists figured this out about 3/4 of the way through the Manhattan Project. They began to understand, well, after the Trinity test they knew, what had happened there. And they said, look, this is unbelievable. This weapon is unbelievable. And they're going to drop it on people. All right. Is that a good idea? Let's discuss it. They debated. They decided, some of them decided it wasn't a good idea. They drafted a petition. They wrote a letter to Roosevelt. Some people think that was not appropriate. Build the bomb and let the politicians do with it. That is not your business. I do not want scientists who think that way representing, well, conducting the science that brings me the future. I want scientists who know when it's time to get political. Sometimes it's inappropriate. Is it appropriate for scientists who know that there's an extraterrestrial presence to consider the political implications? There are scientists that feel it's none of their business and those that feel that it is. MUFON needs to make a decision. Is it science and nothing else, or is science and politics absolutely essential in the age that we live in, faced with what we're faced with? Are the politicians, or maybe even unelected cabal members, going to call the shots? So if MUFON goes out and gets 100,000 members to agree with that idea, that it's time for a political approach to this issue, and $100,000, give you $50, it's $5 million. And overnight, MUFON becomes a powerful political force in the United States. And once that gets going, once that fire has been set, when you look at the audience of Bell and Rents, when you look at the people that have gone to those movies, when you look at the This is on, I'm glad this is on tape, because now you can take this, you can show it to National, you can show it to anybody you want. Spread it around a little bit.
Thank you. Okay, it sounds to me like you're saying that this is a very time-sensitive issue. I hear you saying 3, 4, 5 years maximum in terms of the power of disclosure and some major event flipping it, making it mandatory that people take disclosure seriously. And my question is, what major event? What do you think is going to flip it and make it that important that quickly?
Well, let me clarify. What I'm saying is that disclosure is imminent because it's inevitable. And the forces driving it are pretty much relentless. The cover-up is, the truth embargo is unraveling. And so like the Soviet Union, at some moment it will collapse. Now, it might be a year from now, it might be 2 years from now, it could be tomorrow. Believe me, it'll be that fast. All right, so it will happen. It's inevitable. However, the issues we're facing in the 21st century are on us now, okay? That nuclear bomb could go off tomorrow, and Americans will flood into the country. Martial law will be imposed, right? That biological event could happen tomorrow. Because we're not dealing with those dying kids, we're not properly dealing with our planet, we are not good global citizens. You may be a great Californian, but collectively, and that includes me, as a species, we're not doing the job. Look, if a person has a family, if you got a man and a woman, they have a family of 10 children, but they can only take care of 3, and so they feed 3 and let the other 7 slowly starve to death, you know what happens? The kids are taken away from them, they're thrown in jail. You see? You can't say, well, I'm a good parent, I'm 3 out of 10, what do you want? I don't have enough money to take care of the other 7. The human race has more people that it can take care of. It cannot take care of its children. Those people are dying. The third world is still in pain. It is building up enormous pressure, and that pressure is going to come and get us. All of this is happening right now. So I'm saying is that disclosure needs to happen as soon as possible. So whatever impact it will have on the global situation will happen now, and we can incorporate it. Some of the unpleasantness of disclosure will be a distraction. We can divert our attention to it, right, away from these other issues. And that may not be a bad thing. But until we get through that uncomfortability, we're not going to get to the technology. We're not going to get... Another way I like to put this is this. Ultimately, the collective actions of human beings and the results of policy and the actions of nations really comes down to collective worldview. It comes down to collective worldview. Look, people will make a mistake, they'll do something wrong, but overall, the way things go is how a collection of people view the world. Now, everybody remembers learning in school about the Copernican revolution. And what did it do? It changed worldview. It went from a Earth-centered system to a sun-centered system, and that kind of changed the way people thought. We made a big deal out of it. Okay. Back then, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have cable, they didn't have newspaper, they didn't have a lot of things. So it's like, it wasn't like dramatic. It's going to be more different this time. This worldview change is many magnitudes more powerful than the Copernican revolution, and it's going to massively change worldview. And primarily, it is going to move us towards a global-centered citizenry. Okay? It's going to make us step outside of our country and outside of ourselves and look at the planet as a whole. And it's going to do it to hundreds of millions of people at the same time. That's a big change, right? That's the kind of big change that can give you big results, right? There is no other lever capable of elevating people to global citizenry than that. There isn't anything close. Nothing, right? Somebody will write some book about, you know, being a global citizen. It'll sell 50,000 copies, and it'll be on the bestseller list for a couple of months, and it's gone. We have got to raise the consciousness and change the worldview of several billion people, and we've got to do it very quickly. That's what I mean.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So I would guess that it's most likely due to the increased burning of fossil fuel and the cutting down of the rainforest?
It is many factors. It is certainly the increased human population, which converts oxygen to carbon dioxide. In other words, we are carbon dioxide generators. If we do anything well, we do that well. Any reduction in overall plant life, remember, trees are kind of coming up, but remember, the newer trees don't have the same amount of leafage. But in general, the amount of oxygen-generating leafage in the world is going down. Simple fact. Plankton going down. Of course, generating fuels and everything else is going up. So overall, and the environmentalists have chosen to couch this issue primarily in global warming, because that's scary enough to get your attention, but not scary enough to double you up in fear. And so they talk about the carbon dioxide creating the envelope which keeps the heat in, and maybe. But if you're thinking, hey, you know, Florida's underwater. I live in Kansas. What's the problem? I got a problem. I live in Kansas. I'm not going to be underwater. But what's behind that is that in addition to, if you have more carbon dioxide, you have less percentages of oxygen, right? But they don't talk about it. And this comes under the heading of we're now in a society where whole big segments of reality are not discussed, right? We build all these great universities. We build this huge public school system. We have all these brilliant people, and we have these institutes and everything, and then we say, but we can't talk about this and this and this and this. What is that about? And I just gave you one item, oxygen. When was the last time you heard a politician even mention it?
Yeah, I haven't.
Never have.
Yeah.
That's trouble.
Okay.
That's not good.
My second observation is that the ETs themselves and the power brokers and the military-industrial complex who deal with them are not very democratic. In other words, they're on a don't call us, we'll call you basis.
Yeah.
So they have no interest in spreading this knowledge to the general population
When you
because
say
they
they,
would only
you mean the power brokers and the ETs, or just the power? You're referring to both ETs and power brokers?
They're working together.
Okay, okay.
The power brokers in the military-industrial complex that work
Yeah.
with them.
Yeah.
And the ETs themselves have really no interest in spreading this knowledge because it is not to their advantage. And also, there is a problem of unity, national unity, world unity, and unity among the ETs themselves. Now, this country has embarked on a deviant course, starting with the bombing, geopositioning system bombing
Right.
of Serbia in 1999. We escalated it with September 11th, 2001, and 3, the invasion of Iraq in 2003, which is leading to a schism within our government
This is terrestrial politics.
and world unity as well, and maybe a split with among the extraterrestrials too, but maybe they see it as for fulfilling their ultimate agenda.
Can I comment on
Now,
that?
there was an article in Nexus magazine a few months ago by John Titor, who is a time traveler from the year 2036, and he mentioned a civil war starting in this country this year, leading to our split, and then a conflict with other countries who also have nuclear weapons, such as Russia or China. And he said this would lead to nuclear war in 2015. But his timeline might be different from our timeline. I don't know, because there are multiple timeline branches.
Can I comment on what you said so far? I mean, you said some important things. Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, this issue of unity, all right, be careful here. When I talk about a shift to global citizenry, that's not unity, right? That is a coalescence of worldview. But you can be a global citizen and have very different views about the planet and about, you know, how to live and anything else. But your perspectives align, okay? In other words, you're both looking at the planet. Two people can have very different views, but they can look at the planet as a planet, look at the species as a unity. This is not a unity of opinion, but it is a coalescence of perspective. And that's enough, right? Unity ain't going to happen. A unified belief system is not going to happen. 6 billion people? No. We'll still disagree about tons of stuff. But if enough people look at the world in a more global sense, we'll have a better chance to deal with the issues. Now, with respect to the ETs, well, let me put it this way. First of all, I'm not on their mailing list, so I don't know what they're up to. I mean, I can only guess. They don't tell me, right? So we all can speculate about what they're going to do. But we do know two things. One, two things you need to keep in mind. There's almost certainly multiple species, and that just makes it tough. In physics, when you study physics, which I did, there's the two-body problem in gravity, where you simply try to describe the equations that show two bodies moving around. The moment you add a third body, the equations go nuts, okay? And you need a computer. And if you get to 4 bodies, forget it. One species would have been, you know, 2. We got more than 2. We may have 4, 5, 6. We're talking about an incredibly complex situation. And there probably is multiple agendas here, which makes it even worse, all right? And more important than that, we are dealing with extraterrestrials, okay? And you got to keep reminding yourself that. And the phrase I like to use is kind of, you know, a little joke here. Is it in Muscle Beach, which is in Venice, California, I believe. I used to drop by there once in a while, many years ago, and watch the guys building. Unbelievable, you know, guys, just massive muscles. And there was a phrase that we used about guys like that. They had muscles in places where other guys didn't even have places. You know what I'm saying? With respect to the aliens, is a similar phrase. The aliens have got motives where human beings don't even have places, all right? In other words, they have reasons for doing things that we don't even know what the reasons are. We have no idea. So we're dealing with a massive unknown. And so I try to focus the politics of disclosure on terrestrial things and not try to get too involved with speculating about these guys up there. It's hard to know what they're going to do. But you need to be prepared for some startling things. We may have a deal with one group. We may be in conflict with another. We may be neutral with another. There could be an alliance up here. It's going to be pretty wild and hairy, I think, based upon what I've seen. Some of you have seen similar things. On the other hand, it may be more benign than that. I don't know for sure. I just know that it's starting to emerge. There's enough knowledge here that we're starting to realize what disclosure means. And it's important. One way to help disclosure along, and one way to help contact along, which I think will come after disclosure, after about 4 or 5 years, and one of the basic premises involved in this acclimatization process that's been underway, is that it's in our best interest that disclosure and contact be anticlimactic. In other words, when it finally happens, people are going, yeah, well, I knew that, you know. That was coming. The ETs are here. Well, it's about time. You know, come on in. You know, anticlimactic. That's important, right? We don't want this to be too dramatic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
They determined the oxygen content in the past from ice borings in glaciers.
Right.
About 1,000 years ago, it was 50%. By the Industrial Revolution, I believe it was 39. World War II was 28. It's dropped steadily. But terrestrial flora and fauna only come up with about 3% of our oxygen. Most of it, the 97%, is from photoplankton. And the photoplankton lives within the top 1 to 3 centimeters,
right,
or actually millimeters, I should say, of the ocean. And they have a problem now is that, well, they got oil that takes up more space on the water than the photoplankton, but the infrared is killing it off, and it's not able to adapt to go lower.
Right.
So a lot of it's dying really fast, and it's been exponential, and that's why we're seeing such great drops in the oxygen levels, because the photoplankton cannot adapt to the extra what's coming in.
Fabulous. Let's quickly think about this. I'm not sure if that level of ice core oxygen is 50%, but it could be. All right. I remember hearing a number that startled me. Now let's think about that. That means if we go back not that far, right, in time, to a time when there were mammals on the earth and proto-humans, that those mammals and proto-humans were breathing even 35% oxygen. All right. It means that's how they evolved. That was the environment in which they existed. And in a short amount of time, they're now breathing 20%, 18%, 17%, and that is insignificant? And nobody will talk about it? And this fellow right here, you know what he did? He came up there and he just hit you with some science. It's just some basic science. He says, look, I've read about the corings, I've read about oxygen levels from the past. This is basic science. Now, under one philosophy, you got the science, that's it. There's nothing to do. You sit down, shut up, that's it. Another science, that's it. There's nothing more to say. It's science, and you don't get into the political implications of that. Right? I'm a citizen. I know that the oxygen levels are dropping, but that's science, and I have no interest in getting political. You don't mix the two. We better mix politics and science pretty soon. Or I'm telling you, this century, you're going to be wishing Ed Dames was right. You're going to be wishing you're going to get that big CM coronal mass ejection, and it'll kill everybody off, because it's going to be really bad. I wish it wasn't the case. I wish I could sit here and just sing the praises of the glorious future that are coming, but let me tell you, that ain't the way it is, and that's why Mr. Lay, I believe his name is, has sold 70 million books on the rapture. Because people already instinctively are saying, man, if what I think is coming, I need to get out of here, right? And if I'm going to leave, I would think I would like to go in the company of the Lord. I'm not going to blame anybody for that projection. Hell, that's a good deal, right? And so let's do it. Well, okay, if that happens, then fine, they're in good shape. But if the rapture doesn't make it this century, I'm afraid that everybody that read that book are going to have to deal with it along with the rest of us. So I want that kind of thinking mixed with some political action. And by God, you'll start seeing some real changes around here. Yes, please.
You've talked to John Schuessler. I'm wondering what he thinks about using MUFON as a political action group, or using that database to create a political action and create a fundraiser.
Got to be careful here. Look, back in 1999-ish, the MUFON had their symposium in Alexandria, Virginia. Some of you may have come to that. It was in a nice hotel there, you know, kind of near Crystal City. And Larry Bryan arranged for me to meet with the board, and I talked to them a little bit about this, and they weren't very receptive. I was still young, I was new, and they probably thought, what is this guy talking about? And I don't blame him for that. And that was like 6 years ago. Now, I've talked to John. He did not. In fact, I told him I was going to come and talk about that at MUFON, and he said, fine, come on. He invited me to come. It's the first time I'd ever been invited. So obviously John is thinking. He's expanding his thoughts. But understand, he took over an organization that had been 30 years under another gentleman, and it had a certain legacy and a certain thing. So jumping right in there and turning it around overnight would, you know, there were other issues to deal with. MUFON needed some fundamental issues to be dealt with right away. I don't know what John's ultimate thinking is here. I really don't. And I'm not going to lobby. I'm not going to pressure him. And I'm not really pressuring you, really. I'm basically throwing this out, right? Ultimately, MUFON will make this decision by talking with its members, by having feedback up to the board, and something may happen, it may not, you know, but it's okay. It's all right. You're one part of the organization. That's all. I've talked to some others. And I'll talk to any others that want to talk. But I'm not trying to subvert the organization, and I'm not trying to push John Schuessler where he doesn't want to go. I'm just trying to lay out an option. If MUFON does not do this, I assure you another organization will be formed, backed by big money, and they will take up that mantle, and hopefully they'll do a good job.
And by the way, I'd love to hear your input via email. You can go to MUFONLA.com and send us what your thoughts are on that, okay? Thank you very much.
See? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Carrie Cassidy, and I wrote to you. I communicated with, I'm a producer, independent producer, and I wrote to you about contacting Hollywood. Number one, about the X conference.
Yes, I remember the email.
Also about getting together what I consider to be the alternate journalistic community out there that involves places like KPFK, Pacifica, and you know, radical thinking journalists. Anyway, this is going to fall.
Losing the mic here. We're losing the mic. Hang on. I'm singing. I tell you what. Here's the deal. Don't touch it.
Okay.
Just talk it through.
Yeah, I just didn't think you could hear it. But anyway, so I just wanted to let you know that I was here, and that also I'm wondering why you haven't spoken to the larger Hollywood community, like in this kind of a forum. You know, this MUFON, I've been a member of this for just a year, but I don't see anyone going to the Hollywood community. I know you're on the East Coast and all that, so I'm just saying, you know, I think the Hollywood community really hasn't been tapped the way they could be. I've started to make inroads. I'm communicating, sending emails to, you know, people that I'm in contact with, but I don't have a lot of power at this point yet. And so I just wanted to bring that up. You know,
I remember the email, and I'm sorry I haven't got back to you. I've been on the road, but I remembered it well, and it will get a full response. Let me be quite clear, right? We'll go, you point to the meeting, you point to the home in Topanga Canyon that's got some entertainment professionals that want to talk about this issue. I'll be there tomorrow. If I'm in Bangladesh, I will hop on the next plane. I will even hop on the you know, Aero Prop, the Russian airliner, the one that crashes about every couple of days. I will fly anywhere. And that's what this is about. By the way, we have one more of these left if somebody needs a NUFOC thing. Lisa Davis is going to help build this conference in the heart of Hollywood. I believe that it is likely that very soon a member of the entertainment community is going to make a major move here. It could be any one of about 7 or 8 people. They're going to come forward and they're going to put several $1 million into the politics of disclosure. I think it's going to happen. I think there's a lot of reasons for it. It could happen at any moment, and when it does, take a breath, because things are going to start changing very quickly. This is the perfect issue for them, because there are a lot of people in that community that could come into this, and it would not affect their career in any way. It would not have any political implications for them, but they would become a major player in the biggest event of all time. And this message is starting to get through. And we're trying to meet with them. I can assure you we're doing what we can, but you have to be careful. You know, it's very easy to go from being a dedicated activist to a stalker very quickly. You can't do that. But make it very clear. I said this earlier, I think. There are 2 power centers in America today, which are fighting for the American, how would you say, they're fighting for influence. Washington and the entertainment capital in the West, which includes more than just Hollywood, all right? That may or may not be a good thing, but that's the way that it is. And so you have these 2, and America is going to become an amalgam of what these 2 major power people do. And I cannot blame, whether they're on the right or the left, I absolutely think it's appropriate that the people in the entertainment community who have big money and influence are doing this. Because I'm from Washington, and I know how dysfunctional that place is. I know how screwed up the Congress is. I know the problems with the presidency. I know how the secret government is warping all the fundamental relationships. And so, you know, if I'm a multi-millionaire, 100-millionaire in Washington, and I have concerns about my nation, why wouldn't I want to influence that? And who else is going to do it? Right? There aren't too many people that have the kind of influence. And so they make movies like Enemy of the State, and they tell you about Echelon without actually mentioning it. They make movies about extraterrestrials and tell you about them. They're doing, and they're smart. They do it and make a lot of money at it too. You got to give them a lot of credit, all right? And they're richer than most of the members of Congress. So that's the way that it is. Now, could both abuse this power? Yes. Are they already involved in a lot of major political issues? Yes. But are they involved in this one? Not yet. But it is worth noting, of course, that MUFON, who's the spokesman? The celebrity spokesman, person for MUFON? Dan Aykroyd. And when I saw that, my ears really picked up. So let's just say that that was a John Susler move, and that alone earned him his paycheck for the last couple of years. So John is thinking, and I think John's going to take you where you got to go. And I'm just kind of adding a little extra info.
I do want to say one last thing. Amy Goodman was on KPFK.
Come to the mic, please.
Amy Goodman was on KPFK tonight, right when I was driving to this conference. I don't know if it was set up or what. And she was actually reading something from some guy who wrote something about the fact that the odds, according to him, and he was like a scientist, and I don't remember his name, and she was talking about the, ETs and human beings, and basically saying that odds of there being other life besides humanity were so small as to be infinitesimal.
Was that probably the rare earth guy?
Taking the complete opposite, and it was just an interesting coincidence, and maybe somebody disinformation.
Hey, the guy
put her
sold
up
some
to
books,
it.
and that's an opinion.
But it was actually tonight, right on the way here. And so what my point again with alternate journalism is that I've written to KPFA, and I've tried to get in touch with them about this issue, but nobody has really made inroads, and that's like such a fertile place because those people are used to being against the main wave. You see what I'm saying?
That's true, isn't it?
So they're already stepping out. They're already courageous. So if you can find the members within that organization that are predisposed to be thinking along these lines and influence them to come forward vocally on the radio, then you've got a new venue.
I appreciate what you just said, but I'm going to have to clarify it. I've been sending stuff to Amy Goodman for 8 years. I have been sending stuff to NPR and PBS for 8 years. I've been sending stuff to every media outlet in the country. I've sent out over 400,000 press releases. Now that's the number of press releases times the number of targets, okay? Of all the news entities in the country, the ones that are absolutely the most unable to deal with this issue, they are PBS, NPR, and Pacifica Radio. Why? This is the, the alternative voice. This is the non-corporate, independent voice. Why? Because they get public funding, and the ridicule curtain is too high for them to get over. They can't touch it. They are scared to death of this issue. It is a scandal. They will answer for it. Right? Why fund alternative public entities that do not have the guts to take on issues of this magnitude? They don't deserve that money. Now, they could change their minds, and the only way it's going to happen is the listeners are going to have to get in their face and say, look, I can't get this stuff on CBS and I can't get it on NBC. I want it from you. Bring these people on, or I'm going to start sending nasty letters to the editor, or I'm going to join the conservatives on the left that want to take all your funding away. That's what it's going to take. They will not have me on their show, period. No one, any of these three groups, Pacifica, PBS, or NPR, has ever had me on in 9 years. Or almost anyone else. They occasionally will do something. And it's not the only issue. So you have to completely rethink the value of public alternative broadcasting. Either they're going to stand up for all issues or let them fend for themselves. Yes?
One of our members wanted me to ask a question. Would disclosure be easier if it came out of another country, China, Russia, something like that?
Let me tell you something. People ask me, well, the disclosure is never going to happen, because the government's never going to let it, and so forth and so forth. And I keep telling them, I try to describe all the pressures that are on the government about this. Well, here's one. A couple of years ago, as you know, I'm talking to the choir here. A couple of years ago, a quasi-governmental group called the Cometa Committee came up with the Cometa Report. You know about it. Leslie Kean of KPFK, where'd you go? Right? But let me assure you, Leslie Kean had to get a whole lot of permission to go there, right? And they have never let Leslie bring that in. It's like a separation wall, right? Okay, Leslie, do that, but we're not bringing it in here. But she worked for KPFK. Pacific Radio. Anyway, she wrote that. I helped her write that. I mean, I encouraged her to do it. I encouraged her to branch out into this field. Whatever. The point is that this is a quasi-governmental agency, and yet it was made up of nothing but former military ranking officers and scientists from the French government. And they came up with a report and basically said, look, the logical explanation for this phenomenon is extraterrestrial, and they also chastised the United States for treating it so ridiculously. And it was published in a magazine there and put out to the, it was sent to D'Estaing, the Prime Minister, and it got a little exposure over here. We did our best. We went on the Bell Show and some other things. But let me tell you something. That was a shot across the bow. That was the French government, which is a member of NATO, which is a member of SHAPE, right, which knows about the ET presence. All the NATO countries know about the ET presence. That was Bob Dean's great gift to this field, right? The assessment. Whatever else he did, he got that out there. And there are others that have supported him. Of course, NATO knew about it. They were investigating it, and France is a NATO country, so they know about it. And they deferred to us because we won we won World War II. We were spending trillions to defend Europe from the Soviet Union, right? We had hundreds of thousands of troops in Europe. We had nuclear weapons over there. My God, do you think they're going to cross us on the ET issue? Of course they're not. But after the Cold War ended, it started to change. And the French know about that technology. They know there's energy systems there. They know that there's propulsion systems. They know what I just told you. And so they're getting impatient. They're not the only countries getting impatient with the U.S., which is basically sort of saying, you know, we're the new Rome. We're the big guys in town. You do what we say. When we say jump, you say how high. Everything is done at our time schedule. When we want it, how we want it, when we want it. And the other countries are saying, I don't like this. So France did it. Well, let me tell you something. There are a lot of people in this government that the idea of the French government ending the truth embargo and announcing the presence of extraterrestrials drives them up the wall. I mean, they're going, no! And yet it could happen tomorrow. Okay? If the French government did it, it would be over. Because the British government would follow almost instantly. The rest of NATO would follow, and then the United States. The greatest power of all time would come limping in, you know, like, okay, you got us. Yeah, we got the ETs, you know. And we got the saucers, and we got the bodies, and they didn't tell you. And it's like, okay, you know, it's like, oh, man, they don't want that. And I'm more than happy to tell them that, too.
Why
Right?
was it that the Mexican disclosure was rendered ineffective?
Well, it was rendered ineffective. It was whether or not that was a real sighting or whether or not that was the oil flares, I don't know yet. What was important is that the defense minister released that information to Jaime Maussan and some researchers in Mexico City and had a big press conference when they did it. Now, let's put that in perspective. Imagine if next week Secretary Rumsfeld calls a press conference and in front of a lot of American press, and believe me, if he calls a press conference, they'll show up, he presents John Schuessler with, several hours of gun camera footage from some of our chase jets of UFOs that have been encountered, you know, over the last 10 years. What do you think would happen? But that's exactly what happened in Mexico. And so when I went on, because you know, I got a nice relationship with Fox News. In Washington, D.C. I know some of you are going, Fox News. Well, you know, hey, they're looking at this issue. They get some big credit from me. So they brought me on. Shepard, you know, is a good guy. I really like him. Shepard Smith brought me on to that show. And they asked me about it. And I had one message I wanted to get out. You know, I didn't want to get into an analysis of infrared, wavelengths versus visual wavelengths and whatnot. I just said one thing. I said, that's a shot across the bow by the Mexican government saying to the United States, you know, we got 7% oxygen levels here in Mexico City. We got 70 million people, and we get hit by an earthquake at any time. They could probably destroy all of the capital. You know, we got all of our people fleeing into your country to get cheap labor and cheap jobs to send them. You know, we got a lot of troubles here. We could sure use that technology you're sitting on up at Area 51 or Wright-Patterson. We'd like to have advantage of that. So they did it. That's the message I said on the show. And I said, now that's a pretty powerful statement. I'm saying that the Mexican government is telling the United States government that we would like to see things pick up a little up there on this issue. I figured I was going to get calls from the other networks like that, you know, because they all watch the other shows. All of the producers watch these other shows looking for guests. And this guy pops up and says, you know, the Mexican government's trying to tell us to end the cover-up. I think I'm going to get calls all day long. Didn't hear from a soul. Yes.
I would just like to know, what is your opinion of the internal workings of NASA and the other space organizations, in other foreign countries, in terms of, you have the satellite footage, this continuing footage from the satellites, and the space shuttles, both ours and other countries, and you had the past history with the different the different space flights.
Right, voyages,
yes.
Mars flights, so forth, yeah.
Yeah, inside, and I'm sure they all have, footage of alien activity. Inside NASA, what is the current feeling in terms of, yes, I'm making $100,000 or $300,000 a year, but you have the oil, the need for alternative energies,
right,
and other things coming about. What is the culture? What's the feeling that you feel inside NASA and other organizations you might have a chance to contact or touch bases with, in terms of how long this can go on, or how bad it can,
Well, first of all, I mean, I don't have inside contacts to NASA. Hoagland's got some, and Dick, I would talk about it from time to time. I have a little bit of a sense. I know some things that have happened, but I don't have an internal access to NASA. Now, having said that, one, we have to make a big difference between, some of those scientists that I was talking, the physicists I met in Bethesda and so forth. These are government scientists working on various projects in various government labs, okay? They're cool. They're totally cool. NASA people is totally different, right? I don't get invited to their parties, right? They don't talk about UFOs at their parties. And here's why. And I like to take credit. I think I'm one of the first people that really got this out there, based on some things I wrote back in 1997, I think. It might have been 7, no, it might have been early 1998. If you get a chance, when you go on the internet and Google the 1958 Space Act, all right? Or, the 1958 Space Act as revised, which I think was revised, in 1959. And it's there. You can easily get it and simply read the first page or two, all right? This is the act that created NASA, right? This is a very momentous thing. This is the thing that launched us to the moon and created the civilian space agency, right? Out of the government, the military kind of space work that was going on, and made the civilian agency that would be our representatives. And in the second paragraph of that act, there is a sentence, which I should have memorized, and I haven't. And basically what that says is that any circumstance, discovery, event, or whatever, which that NASA might encounter or deal with that has national security implications, that matter must be deferred to the Department of Defense. Okay? This was the clause that essentially made it possible for the American government to go into space with a civilian agency and still protect the truth embargo. That clause. And it's very interesting that in the first act, right, it also said, and this is 1958, so the president was Eisenhower, if I'm not mistaken, okay? A guy I happen to like a lot, and I think was a very great president, more than we think. In the first writing of the act, it said that in the event of a dispute between NASA and the Defense Department over a matter of alleged national security, that the arbitrator of that dispute would be the President of the United States. Okay? A couple years later, a Democrat was elected president, and they took the clause out. So the president was no longer the moderator of that. There was no moderator. It simply deferred to the Department of Defense. And from that moment forward, NASA has been an agency in conflict with itself, split between its obligations as the civilian explorer of space on behalf of the American people and an arm of the military intelligence complex under the aegis of the defense with respect to all matters extraterrestrial. And that meant that nothing that NASA encountered that had any implications for extraterrestrial life above possibly a fossil in a rock when and if they were ready to talk about that, which they were when they gave that press conference, I think in 98, 97, which was a precursor, by the way. That was a little practice run, that nothing would get out. And that was a tough one. It meant that if the astronauts saw anything, they had to be tied down pretty tight. It meant that if they saw anything in the cameras, they had to edit it out. They had to edit out the feed. And when Martin Stubbs found a way to download, or rather to tap into the download feed from the shuttles, they shifted the thing over so he couldn't get to it. Then they encrypted it. And they played this game. And so you have all these years, you have these scientists who, like me, you know, thought they might go into space, and they studied physics, and they went to work for NASA, or maybe they're in the astronaut corps, and they're going out to explore space, and at some point they suddenly realize, well, yeah, but as far as that is concerned, off limits. And so they're torn, and they have been, okay? As far as I'm concerned, they must have antacid drips available in every bathroom in all of NASA facilities, so the guys can go in and just get as much antacid, because they've all got to be stressed out, right? This would be the summum bonum of NASA, the summum bonum of any scientist's life, particularly any space scientist's life, and it is denied to them, and it's been denied since the day it was created. That's the situation at NASA. That's another victim of the cover-up, right? It's all part of this vast charade in which scientists lie, people keep their mouths shut, honor a bunch of agreements, say up is down, black is white, and it goes on year after year after year until your intelligence has been insulted to the point of unbearableness. You've lost respect for the government, the world loses the respect for us, right? You know, and the thing is, you know, you can't win people's trust with lies, and you cannot win people's allegiance with the butt of a gun, with the brennan of a gun. That's the way it's going right now. We need to change it. So NASA is basically a victim, and until it's freed up, it'll never be the exploration agency it's supposed to be. So, you know, if anybody wants to get a sign, free NASA, and go walk around, some people did, by the way. Some people picketed NASA with that, and I admire them for that. But obviously, we got to save this agency. We also got to save our astronauts, folks. They're about to send them back up. They've made some really fine modifications in the shuttle, one of the truly Rube Goldbergian technologies of all time, and they're about to send some more fine people up in that piece of crap in order to go into orbit while they work on anti-gravity systems underground in New Mexico. Yes, ma'am.
What do you think the implications are going to be if Spaceship One astronauts encounter something? Are they going to be bound by anything that they can't disclose?
What's Spaceship One? Help me here.
The Mojave Desert? The private...
Good point, good point. Another one of the pressures on the cover-up, right, which is, you know, helping to guarantee it will end, is that finally we are not the only people in space, aside from the Russians who have their own problems. So you've got the ESA, you've got the European craft around Mars right now taking photographs, which they're going to have to obviously deal with that if there's anything there. I feel like there is. Are extraterrestrials here? 100% certain. Are there artifacts on Mars? I'm down in the 80% range. That's still good, right? The Japanese sent a craft up, but that didn't make it. But that would have been another one, all right? And now you got civilians going into space. Not very far into space, to be fair, but they're going into space. So, hey, let's face it, you know, it's just going to get tougher and tougher and tougher, right? I mean, what are they going to do, right? Pretty soon kids will be in space, you know, and they're going to have to sign them to all these agreements. Okay, little Johnny, if you see an orbiting extraterrestrial, you promise not to tell anybody, right? You know, or, you know, we'll take away your cable privileges. I mean, it's getting absurd, isn't it? Don't you feel the absurdity of this? Isn't this ridiculous? Right? 50% of the American people say there's extraterrestrials, and the government says there's nothing. That's just, it's nuts. It's nuts. Here's how the press, you know, imagine if and this is an exact analogy, imagine if the American press, in its totality, refused across the board, at the high level, this is top tier, all the networks and the major papers, refused to cover the Iraq War, They would say nothing about it. They wouldn't even acknowledge the Iraq War was there, okay? Right? And then 20 years later, you know, they would say, oh, by the way, there was a war in Iraq. We didn't tell you about it at the time because we didn't think you needed to know, right? That's how stupid it is. The press are basically saying, we're not going to cover this. For reasons which I'm not sure, you know, as I said on the Alan Colmes show, he asked me, why don't the press cover this? And I said, I think they've gone insane. And I thought maybe that, hi Jordan, I thought that may be a little extreme, except what is the definition of insanity? The definition of insanity is when you depart from rational thinking in making the decisions for your actions. And I can assure you that the lack of rational thinking amongst the press right now is remarkable. Right? I have no idea how they arrive at their editorial decisions, particularly with this issue. And I've talked to them, right? I talked to Sam Donaldson about this issue on a few occasions, right? Yeah, he knows. You know why I know he knows? Because on 3 years running, on This Week, which he used to be one of the principals, they have, you know, at the beginning of the new year, they have a thing where they ask the panel their New Year's resolutions. And 3 years running, Sam Donaldson had the same resolution. This would be the year we would make contact with extraterrestrials. You get it? Isn't that funny? Isn't that amazing? But is Sam powerful enough to step up? Even Sam's not that powerful. All right? So we just have to give him a little boost, give him a little help. Jordan, nice to see you.
Stephen, I was quiet until you mentioned Pacifica.
Yes, sir.
You know, I lost my show on KPLS down in Orange County.
I remember.
But before that, I lost another show. I lost one at KPFK. I was there. I had a show from 2 to 4 in the morning with Evan Ray. 2 to 4 in the morning. Very, very difficult time to have a show. Yeah. And so I asked, because I'm at KPFK and because it's a listener-sponsored, supposedly, I was asked by the station if I would do fundraising and, you know, come in and try and raise some funds for the station. So I said yes. And I asked Roy of Hollywood, Roy Tuckman, how much would be a good showing financially? How much would look good? Mm-hmm. And he said, look, if you can get anybody to call you at 2 o'clock in the morning for anything, it'll look good, right?
Yeah.
And I said, well, how much would it look good to you? And he said, well, if you can bring in $500 between 2 and 4 in the morning would be a pretty good price. Yeah. Well, at the end of the 2 hours, Evan and I have brought in $6,600. And the next morning I was made aware that the station wanted me out. They wanted me off the air, and I left KPFK. And the reason why is because the station said that they had had enough of Jordan Maxwell talking about this UFO extraterrestrial stuff. Now, the point I'm making is that if it doesn't matter what you might think of the person, if they're bringing in $6,600 right. between 2 and 4 in the morning, any businessman would tell you that's very good showing. And yet they decided that they didn't want me on the air anymore because of the subject I was dealing with. Mm-hmm. So they don't even care about the money. They care about the subjects that are being dealt with.
What was the year that this happened, Jordan?
About 3 years ago.
Oh, just 3 years ago. That's right. Interesting. So I made a statement that KPFK wouldn't touch this issue, but in fact they did. They had you on. So I stand slightly corrected, but they had you on at 2 to 4. And you know what I think happened? They figured 2 to 4, nobody's listening.
That's right.
Okay. But they got a couple of people out there, and it's kind of like, hey, we're doing something, so get off our back, you know?
Right.
Like, Mr. Bassett, we're doing something. We got Jordan on. And then he goes and raises 6,000. They said, my God, there may be a lot of people listening. That's no good. So let's cut this off before it gets out of control. You think so?
Exactly. I mean, when Roy said the best I could hope for is 500, and we did 6,006, showed that there was a huge audience out there that was contributing at 2 o'clock in the morning to the
Committed
program
audience.
that I was on because of the subject matter. And immediately they said, that's enough of that. So obviously, and when I hear about KPFK needing funds and doing fundraising, I'm saying, come on, I know the real story here. They're not interested in funds. They don't want certain information on that air. They don't care how much money you bring in.
Right. And you want to know something? Thank you, Jordan. And they're missing an incredible opportunity here. I mean, think about it. Think about it. PBS and NPR, which is constantly getting kicked around in the press and in the Republican National Committee, and they're trying to take their money away and everything else, right? if public broadcasting were to take this issue on and be in the phalanx in the front of this issue and disclosure takes place, public broadcasting is set forever, right? They would be set forever. They would become a fixture. They would become the great truth tellers. They'd raise so much money it would choke a horse. But they can't get through that ridicule curtain. I'll tell you something, because he brought that up. I'm going to tell you something I generally don't talk about much, but I'm going to talk about it. Between 1997 and the year 2000, through the end of 2000, I appeared on the Art Bell Show 18 times. And starting in 2001, I basically became persona non grata, right? And we couldn't find out why. I had insiders try to find out. I sent emails and got no response, but apparently I just didn't cut it anymore. Now, I would have figured that if I was a bad guest, they would have figured that out before the 18th appearance. You know what I'm saying? And as you can see, I'm a little dull. I can get a little kind of nod off and be kind of dull. But whatever. Starting in 2001, I was out. I've been on the show twice since then. That's 4 years. One, when someone on my behalf just really browbeat the hell out of George and got on. But that person had a significant vested interest in doing so. And then I got on once with Barbara Simpson during the campaign. I was running for Congress on this issue, and I couldn't get on the show. Finally, they gave me a Barbara Simpson, and I went on. And then I talked about it a little bit. There was a great response. And finally, the culmination of the campaign happened about a month later when we got the signatures approved. In other words, we actually collected the signatures and got on the ballot. That was the first time that had ever happened. And I called to get back on the show. And the producer said, "We already gave you Barbara Simpson. What's your problem? And by the way, don't call or contact George Norrie again directly. You should come through us." You see, I'd known George for many years and done many of his shows in St. Louis. I thought he was a friend. I blew up. Well, since I blew up with the producer, now I'm an evil guy, and they said, "You got to apologize." So I apologized to her profusely, and she accepted my apology. And then I got on one more time. That's it. 4 years.
I have to say something about that. I think you're absolutely right.
Please come to the mic. Yeah, and I also know some other guests that have been told you can come on, but you can't talk politics and you can't talk about the president.
This is an observation that I've made. I was a longtime listener of first Art Bell and then George Norrie. And even now, something has happened, especially with Art Bell. He comes on the weekends. He's on only on,
semi-retirement.
Saturday and Sunday. But now he actually, if you pay attention to the selection of guests, he is actually concentrating away from the UFO issue in general, and anything the least bit sort of questionable. If it's stupid or it's nonsensical, he'll do it. But if it has to do with the UFO situation, he steers clear. Now, he did have John Lear on just the other night.
Well, that was a replay. But he has covered that issue, and Art, who he has every right to. Art is opposed to the disclosure event. He does not want to have it happen. But that is his prerogative.
Right, it may be, but nonetheless, the show is for the listeners, right? So I'm just saying that you're right. Your instincts are right. It's not just you, though. I would put forward that it's actually right. They've gotten the word somehow, some way that they're being steered.
There are some. I will speculate a little bit here. Yeah, what the hell? What can they do to me? First of all, one of the problems they started having is that I'm politics. I'm not talking about the politics. So is Greer. So is some other people. But I think one thing I've been fairly successful at is I got no woo-woo. In other words, I just don't have any woo-woo, which is not to be confused with mojo, right? I got no woo-woo factor. Woo-woo is a kind of a cool thing. If you got woo-woo, you can do a lot of things, and it's sort of discounted, right? right? You can come on and you can say that, you know, there's a spy in the Joint Chiefs of Staff or something and whatever, and if you got a little woo-woo, it's like, yeah, okay, fine, say that, we don't care, nobody cares. And if there really is a spy, they won't even bother you about it. Woo-woo is like a safety gel you get to put around yourself. And I don't got woo-woo. And so I'm basically coming on and I'm trying to build interest in this political thing. And somehow that was no longer cool. Now, this happened about the same time, and it may be a coincidence that Premier Broadcasting, which owns the Coast to Coast show, was purchased by Clear Channel Communications. Clear Channel Communications is a mega conglomerate of 1,300 stations, which is owned by a San Antonio company that is run by the Mays family. The Mays family are extremely conservative, evangelical Christian supporters of George Bush and his father and the Republican Party. The Mays family founded the George Walker Bush Institute of Politics at Texas A&M. They single-handedly created the power of right-wing radio. I am working very hard here to be nonpartisan. They brilliantly understood that the drive time commutes in the United States were going up, and they were going to continue to go up for years. And more people were going to be spending more and more times in their car. And they said, then let's get our views on the radio nationally. We will allow progressive or liberal talk show people to work the local market and a little regional, but we will only elevate the conservatives to the national syndication. And it was absolute genius. And so Rush Limbaugh would be on 3 hours a day, and then they would replay it. So you're getting approximately 30 hours. And then they added Hannity and others. And so that the amount of right-wing radio was running in the 50 to 75 hours. And these are good entertainers. And particularly Rush in the early days, after during the Iraq War, the first war, this couple of years. I love this show. They skewered left and right, but the left particularly, they did a great job. But then it became something else. The point is they're very good. And so now you have tens and tens of millions of people spending hours, well, untold millions of hours, driving in their car, and when they scan that dial, the people that have got the charisma are right-wing, nationally syndicated talk show people, and they literally changed the worldview of the country. Genius. The progressive Democrats, I don't know. They were out partying somewhere, doing a little hash, whatever the hell they were doing. They didn't do anything here. And it took them 25 years to think, wow, why don't we have some radio stations? And they put a lot of money together, and they got one together, and they got 5 or 6 markets. Now they're starting to make a little bit of progress, and Air America is coming on. But Air America is here, and Clear Channel is here. No comment here, other than that is fact. And Clear Channel bought that show, and I suspect that they said, we don't want that issue on the air. Now, that is their prerogative. It is a First Amendment prerogative. It's also First Amendment that we should have a multiplicity of radio, and that a monopoly or a vast amount is too much. Which is why when Michael Powell, of the head of the FCC, tried to expand the ability to consolidate, it created quite a stink and attracted a lot of attention to Clear Channel, which caused Clear Channel to back off because people started learning about the firing of DJs and people that spoke out inappropriately about political matters that were sensitive. So that is their prerogative, all right? However, it's concerning because it happens that on this issue, which I consider the single most important issue in the world today that is not being properly addressed, the #1 outlet was that show. That was the biggest outlet to the audience. And when I was on the ballot and in a position to draw attention to the first campaign of its kind that would have put a lot of interest on it, they cut me off cold. Right? So the message is this. You want to woo-woo, it's okay. You want to flash your photographs, it's okay. If you want to talk about ghosts, it's okay. But if you want to talk about the political resolution of this cover-up, that's not okay. You have another question?
No, Stephen, I think at this point I'd like to wrap it up.
What is it, 2, 3 in the morning? What is
It's close to 12. We usually go to about 10:30, 11 o'clock.
I feel honored that you would go so long.
Well,
I want to go to a restaurant here. I'm not giving up yet. So if
we truly enjoyed having you and coming to see us and talk about this. It's a very, very important subject, obviously.